That's your future being taken from you. When money meant to improve your local schools, hospitals, and roads is snatched away, opportunities for a better life are lost with it. When money meant to improve your government and the rule of law is stolen, so too is your chance for a more just and secure future. Every year we lose billions to corruption, billions that were supposed to improve all of our lives, our opportunities, and our communities. At times, the scale of the problem, but corruption is not inevitable. Together, we have the power to stop corruption. Join us. What is corruption? To us, it's simple. Corruption is the abuse of entrusted power for private gain. Whether it's paying a bribe to access public services like healthcare and education, or whether it's money laundering schemes involving billions in dirty money, what's important is how corruption affects you, and the cost of corruption can be enormous. Corruption can cost you your livelihood, your rights, your health, your freedom, and sometimes even your life. It erodes democratic freedoms, rule of law, and trust in government. Corruption also reduces your chances for a healthy environment and sustainable future. When money meant to tackle the climate crisis is stolen, that's your future being taken from you. When money meant to improve your local schools, hospitals, and roads is snatched, opportunities for a better life are lost with it. When money meant to improve your government and the rule of law is stolen, so too is your chance for a more just and secure future. Every year we lose billions to corruption, billions that were supposed to improve all of our lives, our opportunities, and our communities. At times, the scale of the problem can seem overwhelming, but corruption is not inevitable. Together, we have the power to stop corruption. Join us. What is corruption? To us, it's simple. Corruption is the abuse of entrusted power for private gain. Whether it's paying a bribe to access public services like healthcare and education, or whether it's money laundering schemes involving billions in dirty money, what's important is how corruption affects you, and the cost of corruption can be enormous. Corruption can cost you your livelihood, your rights, your health, your freedom, and sometimes even your life. It erodes democratic freedoms, rule of law, and trust in government. Corruption also reduces your chances for a healthy environment and sustainable future. When money meant to tackle the climate crisis is stolen, that's your future being taken from you. When money meant to improve your local schools, hospitals, and roads is snatched away, opportunities for a better life are lost with it. When money meant to improve your government and the rule of law is stolen, so too is your chance for a more just and secure future. Every year we lose billions to corruption, billions that were supposed to improve all of our lives, our opportunities, and our communities. At times, the scale of the problem can seem overwhelming, but corruption is not inevitable. Together, we have the power to stop corruption. Join us. What is corruption? To us, simple. Corruption is the abuse of entrusted power for private gain. Whether it's paying a bribe to access public services like healthcare and education, or whether it's money laundering schemes involving billions in dirty money, what's important is how corruption affects you, and the cost of corruption can be enormous. Corruption can cost you your livelihood, your rights, your health, your freedom, and sometimes even your life. It erodes democratic freedoms, rule of law, and trust in government. Corruption also reduces your chances for a healthy environment and sustainable future. When money meant to tackle the climate crisis is stolen, that's your future being taken from you. When money meant to improve your local schools, hospitals, and roads is snatched away, opportunities for a better life are lost with it. When money meant to improve your government and the rule of law is stolen, so too is your chance for a more just and secure future. Every year we lose billions to corruption, billions that were supposed to improve all of our lives, our opportunities, and our communities. At times, the scale of the problem can seem overwhelming, but corruption is not inevitable. Together, we have the power to stop corruption. Join us. What is corruption? To us, it's simple. Corruption is the abuse of entrusted power for private gain. Whether it's paying a bribe to access public services like healthcare and education,
For many citizens of African countries, paying bribes to officials for simple services like passports or driving licenses is all too common. Many even need to pay bribes just to file a complaint with the police. In fact, our research shows that 1 in 4 African citizens are forced to pay bribes for these and many other basic services, including life-saving medicines and healthcare. Over the last 2 years, more than 47,000 citizens from 35 African countries shared their everyday experiences of corruption with us. What did they say? Well, more than half of citizens think corruption is getting worse in their country, and their government is doing a bad job in tackling it. Corruption, though, doesn't affect everyone equally. The poorest in society are twice as likely to pay bribes than the wealthiest. And young people are more likely to pay bribes than older people. But corruption and bribery in Africa don't exist in a vacuum. Foreign governments and companies have a role to play, ensuring that cases, bribery, and money laundering in African countries are investigated and punished. The good news? A majority of people are optimistic that they can still make a real difference in the fight against corruption.
Someone had to connect it to a for you.
I'm very sorry.
No.
Well, I was looking at it, but I did it on my phone. I don't even know. Microsoft, I don't know what the guys are doing. They have made it impossible.
Okay. A very good morning to you all. It is the 7th day of the month of December 2020, and I'd like to welcome you all to ABEC 2020. With all that has happened in the year 2020, against all odds, we are here this year for the 2nd edition of the Africa Business Ethics Conference 2020, known as ABEC. This year's edition is not going to be any different, or even is going to be more interesting than the first edition that happened last year, because we're going to be having a lineup of wonderful speakers that will be gracing these occasions. And it's only fitting that this year's event is coming at this time with all that has happened in the year 2020. As you might have been watching earlier, we're playing some highlight videos to get things started. And before we progress further, I want to quickly read some role. Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer, Sterling Bank PLC, who will be ably represented by Mrs. Mojisola Bakare. And we'll be having Ambassador Ayola Olukani, who is the Director General, Nigeria Association of Chambers of Commerce, Industry, Mines, and Agriculture, NACSIMA. Also in our dignitary list is Ms. Hans Satu Adegbite, the Executive Director, Women in Management, Business and Public Service. We're also going to be having Mr. Olusoji Abapa, the CEO of Convention on Business Integrity, and Professor Ayodeji Olukoju, Distinguished Professor of History from the prestigious University of Lagos. But before that, let's have some of our video highlights that were playing earlier. The video on how does corruption affect you?
What is corruption? To us, it's simple. Corruption is the abuse of entrusted power for private gain. Whether it's paying a bribe to access public services like healthcare and education, or whether it's money laundering schemes involving billions in dirty money. What's important is how corruption affects you, and the cost of corruption can be enormous. Corruption can cost you your livelihood, your rights, your health, your freedom, and sometimes even your life. It erodes democratic freedoms, rule of law, and trust in government. Corruption also reduces your chances for a healthy environment and sustainable future. When money meant to tackle the climate crisis is stolen, that's your future being taken from you. When money meant to improve your local schools, hospitals, and roads is snatched away, opportunities for a better life are lost with it. When money meant to improve your government and the rule of law is stolen, so too is your chance for a just and secure future. Every year we lose billions to corruption, billions that were supposed to improve all of our lives, our opportunities, and our communities. At times, the scale of the problem can seem overwhelming, but corruption is not inevitable. Together, we have the power to stop it. Join us. What is corruption? To us, it's simple. Corruption is the abuse of entrusted power for private gain. Whether it's paying a bribe to access public services like healthcare and education, or whether it's money laundering schemes involving billions in dirty money. What's important is how corruption affects you, and the cost of corruption can be enormous. Corruption can cost you your livelihood, your rights, your health, your freedom, and sometimes even your life. It erodes democratic freedoms, rule of law, and trust in government. Corruption also reduces your chances for a healthy environment and sustainable future. When money meant to tackle the climate crisis is stolen, that's your future.
Thank you very much. So no doubt, as you saw from that quick video highlight, this year's theme for ABEC 2020 is fittingly tagged, tackling corruption to reduce poverty, unemployment, and security in Africa. And there is no better time to discuss this topic because there is no doubt that corruption is a major menace, not just in Africa, but globally. So this year's event will be looking at ways and methods to mitigate and solve the issue surrounding corruption. And as I did mention earlier, we have very notable individuals that will be gracing this year's event. And notably amongst that list is His Excellency, Professor Yemi Osibanjo, GCON, the Vice President of the Federal. And we're also going to be having Mr. Andrew Wilson, the Executive Director of Center for International Private Enterprise, CIP. We have also His Excellency, Professor Benedict Orama, the President, Afrexim Bank, who will be ably represented by Mr. Idrissa Diop, Director of Compliance of Afrexim Bank. We're also going to be having Mr. Patrick Obat, the Chairman of Board, Standard Chartered Bank, Kenya, and Mr. Hassan Bello, Executive Secretary, CEO, Nigerian Shippers Council, NSC, Mr. Abubakar Sulaiman, Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer, Sterling Bank PLC, who will be ably represented by Mrs. Mojisola Bakare. We're also going to be having Ambassador Ayola Olukani, the Director General Association of Chambers of Commerce, Industry, Mines and Agriculture, NACSIM. Also, Miss Han Satu Adegbite, the Executive Director, Women in and Mr. Fatai Idowu Onofowote, the General Manager, Lagos State Public Procurement Agency, PPA, and Mr. Muda Yusuf, Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Also on this list of distinguished guests is Dr. Yemi Kale, the Statistician General of Nigeria, and we're also going to be having Otumba Abimbola Ogubanjo, President of the National Council of the Nigerian Stock Exchange. These and many other wonderful dignitaries will be gracing this year's event of ABEC 2020. Now, without wasting any more time, we want to progress as in line with the program for today. Next on my list is the welcome address from our chief host. I want to believe that is ready. Okay. Now we'll be moving over to the welcome address from our chief hosts. By the way, I'm going to be the compare for the next Williams Uzumba. I'm a media consultant with Connect Nigeria. Now, next on our list is the welcome address from our chief host, who is no other person than the president of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, in person of Mrs. Toki Mabogunje. Before I go to Madam President, let me quickly do a quick citation on Madam President herself. Mrs. Toki Mabogunje is the president of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. She's a business consultant interested in the growth and management of small and medium enterprise in African continent. As a business consultant, Mrs. Toki has particular interest in business development, value chain development, project financing, strategic organization and management, and the provision of legal and business advisory services to small and medium enterprises. Over the last 37 years, Mrs. Toki Mabogunje has worked in the public and private sector. This provided her with the opportunity to attain a well-rounded perspective on business enterprise in the Nigerian, African, and global business environment. Toki Mabogunje is active in business organizations of the organized private sector, OPS, in Nigeria. She is presently the president of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and it's notable to mention that she is the third woman in 131 years of the existence of the chamber to be elected to this prestigious position. Ladies and gentlemen, watching from wherever you are, please join me as I make welcome to our chief host, the current president of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, in person of Mrs. Toki Mabogunje, as she gives us her welcome address. Please watch.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon to everyone. Professor Yemi Oshibajo, GCON, Vice President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, Mr. Andrew Wilson, Executive Director for the Center for International Private Enterprise, SIPE, Mr. Idrissa Diop, Director Compliance of Afri-Exim Bank, Mr. Patrick Obath, Chairman of the Board of Standard Chartered Bank Kenya, Mr. Hassan Bello, Executive Secretary, CEO, Nigeria Shippers Council, Mr. Abubakar Suleiman, Managing Director and CEO of Sterling Bank, represented by Mrs. Moji Bakare, who's the Vice President of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Ambassador Ayola Olukoni, Director General, Nigerian Association of Chambers of Commerce, Industry, Mines and Agriculture, NASIMA, Hansatu Adegbite, Executive Director, Women in Business, Management, Business and Public Service, Mr. Soja Pampa, CEO, Convention on Business Integrity, CBI, Professor Ayodeji Olukoju, Distinguished Professor of History, University of Lagos, UNILAG, Mr. Lars Benson, Regional Director, Africa at the Center for International Private Enterprise, SIPE, Mr. Fatai Ido Onofowote, General Manager, Lagos State Public Procurement Agency, Dr. Muda Yusuf, Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome everyone to the 2020 edition of the Africa Business Ethics Conference, with the theme Tackling Corruption to Reduce Poverty and Unemployment in Africa, a necessity for building resilience to global risks. This is organized by the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry in partnership with the Center for International Private Enterprise, SIPE. This conference is a platform initiated by SIPE to promote conversations regarding the practical solutions to addressing corruption as a strategic approach in reducing the high incidence of poverty and unemployment across Africa. Additionally, this conference is an avenue to exchange global and regional perspectives on the opportunities for collaboration between private and public sector stakeholders across Africa for the advancement of our dear continent. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, corruption is one of the biggest developmental challenges facing African economies. African economies cannot bear the increased cost of corruption, which imposes socioeconomic development and minimizes the capacity of African governments to lift their citizens out of poverty and create opportunities for the low-income society. The sub-Saharan African region ranks lowest among global regions in the Corruption Perception Index, with an average CPI score of 32 out of 100. Once corruption becomes entrenched, its negative effects multiply. It induces cynicism because people begin to regard it as the norm. It undermines social values because people find it easier and more lucrative to engage in corruption than to engage in legitimate employment. It limits economic growth because it reduces the amount of public resources and discourages private investment and savings. Corruption has played a major role in causing serious damage to the economic and social landscape in African countries. This in turn has undermined social welfare and also investment in public services, with the eventual negative impact on the quality of lives. The impact of corruption cannot be underestimated. According to Transparency International, 43% of Africans are living in poverty, while over 50 billion US dollars worth of stolen assets flow out of Africa every single year. The low level of development in Africa is reinforced by extensive corruption schemes which scare off investors and discourage development. Effectively addressing corruption in African countries has become a development imperative. Strategies to tackle corruption have to be realistic and achievable and tailored to the specific needs of each African country. At national level, specialized agencies and anti-corruption bodies can be extremely effective, provided they have the sufficient independence, authority, and the resources to function effectively. Government actions alone cannot and will not be effective. A broad coalition against corruption, which encompasses government, private sector stakeholders, the press, the business community, and the general public is necessary. While the ultimate responsibility for combating corruption lies with the countries themselves, there's a role for both regional cooperation and international support. Many corrupt practices are localized or are confined within the boundaries of individual countries. International business transactions have long been recognized as fertile ground for corruption. Regional cooperation and development of regional agreed legal mechanisms to address these problems would be useful, while international effort to stop large-scale corruption in business transactions is absolutely essential. At the end of this three-day discourse, we should have a strategic framework pointing to how the magnitude of corruption can be moderated in Africa in both public and private spheres. Once again, it's my great pleasure to welcome everyone to this auspicious event. I appreciate you all for your kind attention. Let's have a wonderful conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Well said. Thank you, ma'am. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as you rightly heard, this year's topic is very, very crucial, and it's tagged tackling corruption to reduce poverty, unemployment, and security in Africa. And as I did mention while I was doing my earlier opening, this topic is so sensitive. Corruption has turned into a menace, not just in Africa, but globally. So at this year's event, ABEC 2020, we are going to be fashioning pathways as to how we can tackle the issue of corruption. And you're going to be listening to very, very renowned speakers who will be giving practical steps and suggestions that would help us on this quest. So once more, special thanks to our chief host, Madam President, the president of the foremost Chamber of Commerce in Africa, LCCI. Now, moving along, next on the program is a wonderful gentleman that will be talking to us, and he'll be giving us his welcome remark, and he's no other person than Mr. Andrew Wilson, the Executive Director, SIP. And I go to Mr. Andrew, I want to do a quick citation of the profile of the man you would listen to next. Mr. Andrew Wilson is the Executive Director of the Center for International Private Enterprise, CEP, based in Washington, D.C. Wilson has extensive experience working with the private sector on development issues in conflict and post-conflict settings, crafting successful business strategies to reduce corruption, encouraging entrepreneurship development, strengthening business advocacy, improving corporate governance and standards, and promoting economic reform. He is called on frequently to speak about the leakages between democracy and business, as well as the challenges to growth in emerging markets, including corruption and the threats of corrosive capital. Wilson has worked at CEP since 1996 in variety of roles, including Deputy Director for Strategic Planning and Programs and Regional Director for Europe, Eurasia, and South Asia. Prior to his time at CEP, Wilson worked for several development NGOs focusing on economic reform, private sector growth, and public diplomacy. Over the years, Wilson has served on numerous international working groups dedicated to political and economic development in transitional societies. He has also worked with several non-profit boards to improve strategic planning and optimize organizational development. He is currently a board member of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad Museum in Baltimore, and is a director and trustee of the Mildew Foundation in Dallas, Texas. Wilson received his MA in East European Area Studies from the University of London and a BA in History from Lewis. Mr. Andrew Wilson, the Executive Director of Sir, you're welcome to the program.
Thank you, William, and good morning, everybody from Washington, D.C. I'd like to thank you all for attending this conference on ethics and integrity in Nigeria and Africa. CIPE is a leader in providing workable business and private sector-led solutions to the challenges of economic development and democratic governments. We learned a long time ago that economic well-being is at the heart of stable society, and that real and sustainable prosperity can only be achieved if private enterprise is encouraged, enabled, and rewarded. CIPE is one of the core institutes of the National Endowment for Democracy, and being affiliated to the United States Chamber of Commerce, CIPE appreciates the role of the private sector in advancing democratic reform. You know, the U.S. Chamber is the largest business membership organization in the world. We have over 3 million members. CIPE has supported private sector development in Nigeria since 1988 through partnerships, technical assistance, commerce, and business associations throughout the country. So, as an organization, CIPE has experienced the evolution of Nigeria's political and democratic journey, and has over time adapted with the private sector to respond to the evolving challenges and opportunities that strengthen governance and promote development through private enterprise. Today, as the call for good governance, anti-corruption, and renewed commitment to integrity and ethics reverberates around the world, led by citizens across all demographic backgrounds, Africa has not been left out, and Nigeria certainly has not been left out. As we know, a thriving democracy must make every effort to deliver on the promise of development, justice, equity, equality, inclusion, and fundamentally integrity, transparency, and accountability to be sustainable. We ignore these principles at our peril. Integrity and ethics are essential pillars of society that give citizens the ability to live together peacefully and collectively under a set of rules that are determined by religious and societal norms and of course, the rule of law. Integrity is a personal commitment to be honest and fair and abiding by common ethical standards. Without integrity, we do not have trust. And without trust, we cannot have a strong, vibrant, peaceful, and prosperous society. The social contract that every government has with its citizens is that the government will provide security, health, and education to spur economic growth and development. The role of business is to generate the jobs, income, and leadership that makes a social contract possible. In business, at the center of every transaction is trust. Trust guarantees to a buyer that the seller will provide the agreed product or service to the agreed quality, and that the buyer will pay the agreed upon price. Corruption or graft is often referred to as a cancer within society and brings an unquantifiable social and human cost on all members of the society, from the youngest to the oldest, the most vulnerable to the most privileged. Graft is a worldwide problem. It has existed since the beginning of time and refers to high net worth corruption that can be measured in terms of economic opportunity. Now, the United Nations estimates that $3.6 trillion is lost to corruption, while the World Bank estimates that corruption adds 10% to the cost of doing business, and many argue this is a conservative figure. In Africa, the African Union estimates that $140 billion a year is lost to corruption. This is equivalent to the GDP of all but 5 countries in Africa. To put this in another perspective, this amount can ensure uninterrupted power to 24 hours a day to every citizen in Africa for 3 years. Although corruption is a worldwide problem, the impact of corruption in Nigeria has far-reaching consequences on the prospects of the nation and on the quality of life of every citizen. The country is unable to generate enough tax revenue. Citizens aren't able to access basic social welfare unless, as a result. The UNODC and the Nigeria Bureau of Statistics found in 2019 that 1 in 3 Nigerians paid a bribe to access essential services in the past 3 years. Most worldwide indicators demonstrate this problem. Transparency International ranks Nigeria 146 out of 180 countries in regards to the Perception of Corruption Index. That's their 2019 ranking. The Mo Ibrahim 2020 Index suggests the problem is getting worse with regards to corruption under their Transparency and Accountability Index that tries to measure overall governance. And the Ease of Doing Business report indicates that Nigeria, now 131, but is still the level it was in 2012. Burdensome, inefficient, and inconsistent government regulations facilitate corruption by creating the perception or reality that bribe or trade and influence is a more effective way to get things done. An efficient, transparent, and accountable system of public administration will boost innovation and growth in the Nigerian economy, control corruption, and eliminate waste and unethical practice, authority, trade and influence, and other practices that undermine competence and merit-based development. In a study on corruption in Nigeria by the Carnegie Endowment for Peace, these are recognized as legalized corruption and deliberate waste. What is important to note in this study is that unethical defined as unacceptable behavior will evolve over time, and in a decade or longer, the legal framework will also be changed. Over the course of the next 3 days, we will be exploring solutions to combating grand and petty corruption, and we'll hear from different panelists about solutions. SIPE's experience is that every country is different, and the solutions that work in one country would not necessarily work in others. That said, SIPE does know that combating corruption is a collective effort. It requires contribution and collaboration from every pillar of society. The growing international consensus is that for countries to be successful in the fight against corruption, you need to have 4 essential elements. First, norms within society and the business sector that encourage and reward fairness and honesty. Second, you need social activism and collective action that brings different groups to work together collectively with shared interests, values, and purposes rooted in integrity. Third, you need a strong civil society that brings together a network of voluntary groups. This isn't always NGOs alone, but it can also be religious groups and even trade unions. And finally, sustained participation and political engagement of many people in sharing information, communicating, and participating in government's processes. After 37 years of private sector development experience, SIPE focuses on developing strategies in collaboration with partners around the world to galvanize the private sector to combat corruption. These interventions have taken different shapes and forms relevant to the socio-political and economic circumstances in each country. But what is consistent is that with SIPE's partnership, the organized private sector should no longer be a passive victim of corrupt systems, nor an active participant in corrupt systems. While private sector leadership in anti-corruption efforts is still a less explored field, the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry has demonstrated the truth that to tackle corruption, the business community must be engaged. Just last week, SIPE was privileged to participate in the public-private dialogues with the Federal Inland Revenue Services and the National Agency for Food and Drug Administration to address the findings of the extensive research led by LCCI to identify the vulnerabilities to corruption in the administration of these agencies. NAFDAC has commenced comprehensive short and long-term interventions in response to this engagement, starting with reinforcement of the tone at the top of the agency. Such collaborative efforts serve to improve the quality of service and the experience of businesses in transacting with agencies, resulting in a multiplicity of benefits to both citizens and government. SIPE remains committed to this endeavor in Nigeria and is proud to be a partnership with the LCCI, the Convention for Business Integrity, and the Institute for Directors Center for Corporate Governance in championing ethics and integrity in the public and private sector in Nigeria. Finally, I want to thank our partner in organizing this chamber, the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and other sponsors that include the National Endowment for Democracy, World Movement for Democracy, the Open Government Partnership, Accountability Lab, and Asoko Insight. I look forward to hearing the results of the ABEC conference, and I wish you fruitful deliberations. Thank you to all, and have a pleasant conference.
Thank you very much, Mr. Andrew Wilson, the Executive Director for the Center for International Private Enterprise, SIPE. Thank you very much. From the way Mr. Andrew spoke, you could tell that he is indeed, as his profile reads out, he is indeed someone that is very passionate about the subject matter that we are treating this year on corruption. So once more, we say a big thank you to Mr. Andrew Wilson, the Executive Director from the Center for International Private Enterprise, SIPE, all the way from Washington, D.C. Thank you for joining us, sir, this early. Now, ladies and gentlemen, moving along, during this 3-day event, we're going to be playing 3 very unique videos that will be highlighting the basis or the importance of the subject matter that we're going to be discussing for this year's event. And right about now, we shall be moving to the very first of this 3-series video, and this one is titled Cost of Corruption Part 1. So please give your undivided attention as we shall be playing this video. Please.
According to defense, security, education, and health, to mention a few, therefore making the country vulnerable to minor and significant shocks, such as the COVID-19 pandemic. Due to corruption, Nigeria's entrepreneurs and businesses suffer some of the highest cost of operation in Africa, resulting in stagnating and receding economic and developmental progress. Although the opportunities for growth and development in Nigeria and across Africa are abound, the future of Nigeria as a stable, prosperous nation remains very uncertain due to the extreme levels of corruption in the public and private sectors. This is why the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, in collaboration with the Center for International Private Enterprise, is hosting the 4th Africa Business Ethics Conference in Nigeria, providing a platform for insightful and constructive deliberations about tackling corruption in Nigeria and in Africa as a continent. The theme for ABEC Nigeria 2020 is tackling corruption to reduce poverty, unemployment, and insecurity. This presentation is orchestrated to interrogate the manifestation and impact of corruption in the following spheres of the Nigerian economy. 1. What really is the cost of corruption to you as an individual and to your business? 2. What is the cost of corruption in the informal and underbanked sector? And 3. What really is the cost of corruption on security, peace, and freedom? From a survey on MSMEs and businesses in Lagos, Kano, and Aba, the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry found that 76% of MSMEs said they paid a bribe to a government official in the past few months. Processing consistency and lack of transparency in regulatory agencies increases cost of processing official requirement by between 5 to 50%. Little wonder, Kofi Annan once said, if corruption is a disease, transparency is a central part of its treatment. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the topics for our plenary and breakout sessions for day 1 shall cover the following issues. A. Tackling corruption in the maritime industry. B. Transparency and accountability in public procurement and spending. And C. The supply side of corruption, prioritizing ethics and integrity in business culture.
Seeing is believing. When you are supposed to get something out in time and you are not getting it, and at the end of the day, when money exchange hands, you get it out. I mean, you have to weigh your options.
We are on the verge of completing registration with a government agency in Nigeria here. And the funny thing is, in bringing that product to market, and particularly from an SME standpoint, we had to take loans, and it took us 2 years to get that product registered. Over 2 years. Now, in that 2 years, we borrowed money. Interest began to run on the loans that we collected, and we've had to pay, for each of those years, we've had to pay 20% on those loans that we've collected. We had not even started. We've not brought the product to market. We have already started paying, percentage interest on those loans.
Let me not even use government. Let me look at my company. Years ago, we were bagging at the ports. And I remember we had cables that are needed to connect the grabs to the vessel. And I remember they would go missing quite frequently, and we would buy new ones. And I remember my boss at the time asking me very sternly, why is this happening? Why are we doing this? And I remember telling him, because it's cheaper for us to allow the staff to steal those cables so that the ships are not delayed in the processing. And I think a lot of people have these stories. There's always a small percentage that, this is for your own people. They're going to take it. So you almost officially leave it for them to take so that you can manage the theft or the corruption at a manageable scale.
The mindset of custom officers needs to be changed in the maritime sector. The federal government should stop giving the Nigerian Customs Service revenue targets, because the primary role of customs under the World Customs Organization is trade facilitation. And when you facilitate trade, revenue is generated. But in this country, the federal government makes revenue generation the primary responsibility of customs, which is not the case. It's supposed to be a trade facilitation agency.
Thank you very much. So there you have it, the very first of our series of videos on the subject matter that we are treating. So ladies and gentlemen, moving along right now, we want to progress to our very first keynote address, which will be handled by Mr. Idrissa Diop, the Director of Compliance of Afrexim Bank. He is ably representing His Excellency Professor Benedict Orama, the President of Afrexim Bank. Now, before we move over to Mr. Idrissa Diop, I want to do a quick citation on him, the person of Mr. Idrissa. Mr. Idrissa Diop is the Director of Compliance of Afrexim Bank since June 2019. Prior to joining Afrexim Bank, he was the Group Head Compliance of EcoBank Transactional Incorporated ETI, the Pan-African bank headquartered in Lomé, Togo, holding company of the EcoBank Group, present in 36 African countries with internal offices in Paris, London, Dubai, and Beijing. At ETI, he managed a team of around 180 compliance staff across EcoBank country platform from June 2011 to his departure to Afrexim Bank headquartered in Cairo, Egypt. Before EcoBank, he worked during 10 years in Luxembourg, where he handled senior manager compliance roles at Schroeder, IM, Luxembourg, Amundi Luxembourg, and at Societe Generale Bank and Trust, SGBT, as a senior internal auditor. Idrissa started his internal audit career in 1998 in Paris with Amundi, France, formerly Credit Agricole Asset Management, and has worked with CIC Est Bank, Strasbourg, France, as internal auditor before moving to Luxembourg. Idrissa studied in France and holds a Bachelor of Finance from the Panthéon Sorbonne University, Paris 1, a postgraduate in France from the Saint-Guy Potois University, a master's degree in internal audit from the Rennes Descartes University, Paris, and finally, a university degree in Islamic finance from the University of Strasbourg, France. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me as I make welcome our keynote speaker for day one of ABEC 2020, in person of Mr. Idrissa Diop, the Director of Compliance of Afrexim Bank. Sir, you're welcome.
Thank you, William. Your Excellency, Professor Yemi Osibanjo, Vice President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, Mrs. Toki Mabunje, President of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure for me to represent my institution, the Afrexim, the African Export-Import Bank, Afrexim Bank, at the 2020 Africa Business Ethics Conference. I would like to take this opportunity to express our gratitude to the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry for honoring us with this invitation. Corruption and related illicit financial flow has a major impediment to economic development and democracy in Africa. It is estimated that every year, an equivalent of 3.7% of Africa's GDP leaves the continent as illicit capital flight. Most of these illicit flows stem from proceeds of corruption. Ladies and gentlemen, between 2000 and 2015, the total illicit capital flight from Africa amounted USD 836 billion, compared to Africa's total external debt stock of USD 770 billion in 2018. This makes Africa a net creditor to the world. A 1-point increase in corruption decreases the growth rate of GDP between 0.75% and 0.9% per year, and of per capita income growth rate between 0.39 and 0.41% respectively. Corruption slows economic growth because it distorts intensive and market signal, leading to misallocation of resources. Corruption not only increases the cost of production, but also increases uncertainty in African economies, hence decreasing investment and financial, physical, and human capital. Corruption is an inefficient tax on those who are forced to pay it, hence it raises the cost of production. Corruption is also positively correlated to income inequality. Unsurprisingly, surveys reveal that the poorest people are twice as likely to pay a bribe and more likely to be victim of corruption than the richest. Increases in corruption hurts the poor rather than the rich and powerful. Corruption reduces the productivity of resources because it degrades the quality of such resources. For example, as governments are fighting to control the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic, corruption around relief funds and procurement in COVID-19 management efforts will have detrimental effects to the quality of healthcare facilities and resources, thus slowing down the recovery of economies from the impact of the pandemic. Ladies and gentlemen, corruption has hindered economic growth and employment opportunities for the youth in Africa. As a result, many African youths are now losing their life in an effort to illegally migrate in search of better opportunities in developed countries. Corruption undermines democracy. By diverting rare resources from disadvantaged people, it damages the rule of law, social justice, and lowers the trust of citizens in political institutions and processes. In its 2020 reports on economic development in Africa, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development explained that stopping illicit capital flight could almost cut in half the annual financing gap of USD 200 billion that the African continent faces as it strives to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. In the Continental Free Trade Area, CFTA, Africa is arming itself with a tool for future prosperity. However, the success of the CFTA is arguably partly dependent on the continent's ability to combat corruption and illicit capital flows to ensure availability of resources and infrastructure. Political will and commitment. Improving governance is difficult as the beneficiary of corruption often fight back. It is a complex draw-out battle among the various players, such as government, institutions, civil society, media, and the private sector. Strong political commitment is thus an absolute requirement for success. Effective economic governance institutions are essential, not only for combating corruption, but also for structural transformation and inclusive development in Africa. Multiple factors have contributed to success on certain countries on anti-corruption efforts. These include measures to reduce corruption opportunities, such as cutting red tape and lowering trade barriers, measures to constrain corrupt behavior, such as independent judicial system and a strong anti-money laundering framework, and improve fiscal institutions with greater transparency and control. Building expertise and empowering employees in institutions designed to fight corruption will improve their prosecution capability and bridge the gap between anti-corruption prosecution. Citizen engagement in the fight against corruption is also crucial. With the rise of mobile technology, ordinary citizens in many countries now have instant access to information and an ability to voice their opinion in a way that previous generations did not. At the regional level, the impact of regional collaboration on governance and anti-corruption has greatly improved. For example, the African peer review mechanism as a self-monitoring initiative to promote good governance in Africa has facilitated improvement in governance and of African institutions. Afrexim Bank welcomes support mechanisms such as the African Business Ethics Conference to complement efforts of respective African governments in fighting corruption and promote achievement of the objectives set out in the Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda 2063. Afrexim Bank, as a development financial institution, supports efforts of good governance and anti-corruption, which will in turn enhance capacity to trade and economic development across Africa. Such support include advocacy and collaboration with member countries' regulators, policymakers, and other institutions involved in developing governance and anti-corruption framework within the African continent. And by implementing policies to combat corruption, illicit financial flows, and money laundering and terrorism financing. The bank is implementing several initiatives through the Afrexim Trade Enabling Digital Ecosystem, which aim to provide transparency and market information on African institutions, and which will serve to support anti-corruption efforts. Lastly, I conclude, I would like to congratulate the African Business Ethics Conference for enabling a stimulating constructive dialogue and creating opportunity for cross-collaborative initiative amongst diverse stakeholders in anti-corruption efforts. I thank you for your attention. To you, William.
A very big thank you to you, Mr. Idrissa Diop, the Director of Compliance from Afrexim Bank, for that wonderful delivery. And please do relate our special greetings and thanks to His Excellency Professor Benedict Orama, the President of Afrexim Bank, whom you ably represented. And there is no doubt from the way the various speakers have been speaking so far that, as I mentioned earlier at the start of the opening, corruption is a menace that we all have to come together to tackle. So we say a very big shout out and thank you to the organizers of this wonderful event, in SEP, and of course, the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, LCCI. And you did hear earlier from our keynote speaker in person of the current president of the LCCI, and of course, the director from SEP in person of Mr. Andrew Wilson. Now, ladies and gentlemen, moving along, we want to go to the next speaker on our program, on our list, and this speaker will be speaking on the imperative for private sector leadership to mitigate corruption in Africa, and he's no other person than Mr. Patrick Obert, the chairman of board, Standard Chartered Bank. And before we go to Mr. Patrick Obert, let me quickly do a quick citation on his profile. Mr. Patrick Obert is the managing consultant for Eduardo Associates, a private practice consultancy in energy, extractives, HSE, and engineering with special emphasis on leadership, governance, and sustainability. Patrick joined the oil industry in 1976 and has held many management positions in shell companies in Kenya, United Kingdom, the Netherlands, and Malaysia in the areas of general management, supply and distribution, engineering, and sustainability. He also has extensive experience in social, government, and developmental issues, and is a regular resource person on governance, leadership, and sustainability issues in both Kenya and across Africa. Patrick has been involved intimately in the business community in Kenya and East Africa, and is a past chairman of Kenya Private Sector Alliance, KEPSA, and a member of its communities involved in extractives, governance, and energy. He sits on the boards of several business member organizations. He holds a BSc in Mechanical Engineering from Nottingham University and is a member of the Energy Institute, UK, the Petroleum Institute of East Africa, and the Institute of Engineers in Kenya. He is chairman of PZ Cousins East Africa Limited, Standard Chartered Bank Kenya, and Java House Africa, and is a NED in several large companies involved in banking, FMCG, and ICT. He is a fellow of the Aspen Global Leadership Network, AGLN, and the African Leadership Initiative, ALI. He has been awarded several national recognitions in Kenya. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me as I make welcome the next speaker on day one of APEX 2020, who will be discussing on the topic, the imperative for private sector leadership to mitigate corruption in Africa. Mr. Patrick, you're welcome to the program, sir.
Thank you very much for your warm welcome. And I recognize all the distinguished leaders that we have in this conference today. Some of them have been mentioned, and I take that all protocol has been observed. I've been asked to speak today about the imperative for private sector leadership to mitigate corruption in Africa. And I want to look at it in three buckets. The first one is the external to our organizations, external to the things where we work. And then we look at the internal in terms of the areas we can influence directly under the places we work. And the third one, and probably the most difficult one, is the personal commitment of leadership to reducing corruption. If we take the external environment and we look at what happens in the areas where business operates and us as leaders in the business work in, we look at some of the metrics that play around in terms of corruption. Almost 30% of us pay to get public service. And that is across the board. And and we pay it in cash and in kind. The second thing in the external environment that we look at is that a lot of people in Africa accept corruption as a way of life because they've been so used to little things happening. You pay for this, you ask somebody a small favor here and there, things work for you. And as those things happen, it becomes the way of working. And when you look at the corruption index globally, and you think of the countries where they seem to have no corruption, my take is that because it is a questionnaire, you talk to people about what they've seen. If a country is operating in that particular manner, you'll find that their corruption index is very good. Because people will say that we will not consider these things that happen in terms of small bribes, small facilitation payments, and everything else as corruption. It's become a way of life. So sometimes those indicators on the external side, I have a bit of a sort of a small question on them because of the way the data is gathered. But let us just see that most of the people in a lot of our countries accept that corruption is the way that makes life easy. So you've got an environment that is very, very positive to corruption. And to change that, for us as leaders, is going to be a huge, huge job. But we'll come back to how to do it. The other thing is there are a lot of interlinking social factors that drive the propensity for corruption. If you look at our health systems, our education systems, we look at water, availability of water, shelter, food, and so forth, all these things, in a lot of our economies, most of the population are struggling. The health systems are not working. So if somebody wants to get treatment or education or so forth, they have to pay out of their own pockets. And the kind of salaries that people are paid do not help at all. So if people can make a bit of money for that to happen, they will actually do so. And corruption is a very easy way of doing it. And once you get into that, into that area, it becomes a way of life. And again, that is the external environment in which you are trying to lead a corruption-free organization. It's tough because you'll be finding headwinds everywhere. So as organizations, what do we need to do in terms of the external factors that drive corruption in our countries? I think we need to recognize that as leaders in whichever sector we're in, we have to drive a national discussion around the provision of proper social amenities for the populations in which we are. But the provision of those is again undermined by corruption itself, because sometimes when you look at state corporations that are supposed to provide those things, in the provision of those activities, there's corruption taking place as well. So that will come back to the personal, which I'll deal with at the end. as to how you make sure that even the external environment where you operate in can begin to help reduce corruption rather than be the driver of corruption because of the people who work for us and the people who we work with, that all the time are looking to make life easier for themselves and are susceptible to corruption because of the need for services. When we come to the internal factors in terms of a lot of organizations, we find that, starting with the private sector, which I'm more familiar with, we have a lot of, we look at risks, we look at all those things, indicators internally, and we talk about corruption as a risk that we have, and we put all these good words about corruption. But how often are we as organizations keen internally to really drive corruption out of our organizations? Are we willing to tell the world what we are doing in terms of driving corruption out of organizations and share the indicators that we have with the world outside to show that, yes, as an organization, our propensity to corruption is very low because we're doing A, B, C, D, E. And there are few organizations in my country whereby they actually publish in their annual reports the kind of activities that they're doing in terms of limiting corruption, but also the kinds of examples of corruption that have happened in the organization that they're trying to deal with. So the fact that you have corruption in an organization in itself is not a weakness. I think it is a great strength in actually saying that, yes, we have corruption in our own organization and we're dealing with it. And to share the fact that you're dealing with that corruption with people. And I think internally as organizations, we really have to be bold to begin to do that. And I'll give examples of a company where I was doing some consultancy work, and I was on corruption. And they had everything in place. They had an anti-corruption policy, they had bribery, they had whistleblowing, they had everything that you would think of in terms of making anti-corruption work in an organization. But when we went into a seminar whereby I just sort of presented a few questions with anonymous answers to the board of the company, the management, and the second level management, about 15% of the population of the organization. And we asked them very simple questions. Have you been bribed? Have you ever received a bribe? Have you seen somebody receiving a bribe? The company was very surprised that the answers, yes answers to those questions, were over 40% of the people present in that room who had received, had seen, and had given bribes. Yet they had all the things that we normally talk about internally available and in place. Yet the people in that organization were still doing corrupt activities, which goes to show that a lot of us, whilst we talk about having systems in place to stop corruption from happening, the practice is different. And in the same meeting, when we asked, so what kinds of corruption happen in this organization? And there was almost 50 different ways, 50 different answers that came through. And they could be grouped into maybe about 5 or 6 key areas. One was nepotism. Another one was the fact that people who understood the internal processes in that company knew the loopholes, and they could therefore advise people outside to do certain things so that they could get favorable outcome approach to that organization. You know, that's their back. And you can go on and on. So a lot of these things are being facilitated internally by people who understand fully the way an organization operates. So how do you mitigate against this? And is it only private sector that has it? We carried out a similar exercise with faith-based organizations. And the faith-based organization said, no way, there's no corruption in the faith-based organizations, churches, mosques, temples, and so forth. But when we brought their top leadership again into a room and asked the same questions through an anonymous system, instead of the low level they expected, less than 0.5%, it turned out that even the people of the cloth, the religious people, were at 30 to 40%, exactly the same that we found in the private sector. And yet these are people that you believe have got values around corruption and so forth. So it is not something that at an internal level can be done purely by systems. We need to change the way our people work, the way they think. And some good examples that have happened in other places that I've worked in is that you ask people to report and reward them for reporting potential incidents of corruption. How would corruption happen in our company? And somebody imagines it, and they know the systems well enough, and they can see it from that side, and they'll tell you, somebody could bribe in this manner, somebody could be corrupt in this area, they could actually undermine particular systems in this way. And you reward people for looking at that, and you strengthen your systems. And that way you begin to drive this gradual change of culture in an organization. There is something that we need in terms of managing corruption in organizations. And I think it comes up to us, myself, Patrick Obath, as a leader. There is a role, and now I'm coming to the personal, that is required for people to set an example in an organization. And the private sector, being a very strong influence in any economy, could actually be the best catalyst for change in terms of personal commitment to stopping corruption. And in many countries, you have this issue of public servants declaring their wealth, declaring their annual, their annual salaries, and so forth and so on. And you find that the political class will not want to do it. But the private sector also doesn't do it. Apart from when you're forced by your capital markets authority or the stock exchange to declare, the salaries and the directors' remuneration that you have. Then you do it because it's required by law. But that is only a very small part of what you have as a remuneration. If an organization is serious, and if leaders are serious about mitigating corruption, the first thing to do is for us to declare our wealth on an annual basis. And one of the things we've been trying to do unsuccessfully, but hopefully we will get there one day, is to have a National Wealth Declaration Day by CEOs in a country. And I know we have, as one of our sponsors, the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Was that something that they could consider making as part of their membership drive, that you say we will have a Wealth Declaration Day as a chamber once a year, where all the leaders that we have do that? And is it then worthwhile doing the same thing in a company where the issue of wealth is very transparent? And therefore, when corruption happens and people have other wealth, it can be shown that from all we know from your sources of wealth, there is no way you can have accumulated this much wealth, because you know what you've declared cannot give that kind of thing. We had a few private sector CEOs doing it in this country, and they did it the first year when there was a lot of noise. But since then, they have never declared their wealth at the same time every year. And it's a struggle that you're trying to get to make people declare their wealth regularly. So when you look at the three areas, the external, the internal, and the personal, those three need to work together for an organization, for us in the private sector, for private sector organizations, corporates, to be able to start having an impact on mitigating corruption in our own countries and across Africa. The common denominators around corruption are the same across all countries. They're not different. And whilst we say that corruption is different in every country, I think the solutions are generally the same. The application may be slightly different. And for me, is the three things I talked, that internal, external, and personal. One, as private sector leaders, we have to start making enough interactions with the governments and the other external organizations to start changing the societies where we live through putting in proper policies and making sure that things happen well. Internally in our own organizations, we need to begin being innovative and creative and being bold in terms of the things that we do to ensure that our own staff, our own systems are not compromised, and that our staff actually work to the values that we expect them to do, not just to state them as part of our processes, but to make sure we actively manage the change in culture in our own organizations. And as personal people, as personal indicators, we as leaders must begin to do something that is uncomfortable, like declaring our wealth publicly and having people scrutinize what we do. Because if we ourselves are afraid of doing that kind of thing, how can we ask somebody else to be able to do that? I belong to an organization that eschews proper values, and we have something. This is I'm a member of a club called Rotary, and we have a very simple thing called the four-way test of the things we think, say, or do. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendship? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? And by applying a simple rule like that and having people eschew those values, slowly we will begin to get the kind of change that will allow us to mitigate corruption in our organizations, starting with the individuals and gradually building up into the collective, which is the company, and then building out beyond the company into the community where that company lives. So I would like to end there in a simple way and say that we simply need to look at those three areas. As leaders ourselves, the organizations where we work in, and then the wider organizations where we live in. If we can, starting with ourselves, make bold steps and let that wave begin to have the ripple that you normally see on the surface of a pond that can then begin to impact in wider areas, then we will be able to mitigate corruption. But it will not be done by simply doing it in 1 year. It is something that you have to do over 5, 7, 10 years before you get permanent change and you begin to see corruption beginning to come down in Africa. Corruption currently is about 12% or even 15 to 20%, depending on the country, of the GDP of that country. If that could be applied back into solving social problems, we would have a much wealthier nations in Africa, much healthier nations in Africa. So the economic justification is there. All we have to do is to start with ourselves to ensure that we mitigate corruption. Thank you very much for listening to me, and let me hand you back to our moderator. Thank you.
A big special thanks to Mr. Patrick Obat, Chairman of Board, Standard Chartered Bank Kenya, for those wonderful, wonderful delivery. And it's very noteworthy to note that in Mr. Patrick's speech, he was stressing the point that it's one thing to have a system in place. It's another thing to have practical ethics that can help you actualize or do things the way things are meant to be done. And it's very interesting that what Mr. Patrick was saying on ethics would actually lead us to the next video that we shall be watching, that is titled Business Championing Integrity, Doing Business with Integrity in Nigeria. So ladies and gentlemen, please give your undivided attention to the next video that we shall be looking at on ethics, which happens to be a very sensitive topic that the last speaker, Mr. Patrick Obat, fully discussed on. Please watch.
SMEs are the driving force of African economies, accounting for 40% of continental GDP and 50% of employment. But despite being the backbone of the economy, these businesses face significant market constraints that impede their full growth potential, in turn limiting overall economic development. The International Finance Corporation reports that SMEs in Africa experience an estimated financing gap of over $330 billion annually. They lack access to capital to grow and face high barriers of integration into global supply chains. Currently, there are over 350 million African SMEs that are unbanked, and only 50% can access financial products and services, according to the World Bank. Even when SMEs get access to financing, they endure higher lending rates to make up for the increased onboarding and due diligence costs found in car due to lack of accessible and verifiable information about their operations. But what if there was a way to de-risk SMEs in African scale? Enter Ethics First, an innovative new platform that is doing that by giving SMEs a route to improving their governance in a recognizable and standardized way, and increasing their visibility to global partners and financiers. It is a business-led answer to Africa's compliance needs. Aimed at enhancing the integration of African SMEs into global supply chains, Ethics First offers a low-cost digital solution for businesses to strengthen their governance and anti-corruption management systems and boost their global reputation. How does it work? African companies are invited to register on Ethics First and follow the program to demonstrate the strength of their commitment to the Ethics First values in 3 stages. Green. Business leaders sign a free integrity pledge to commit to enhancing their company's governance and control systems within a specified time frame. Silver. Demonstrate enhanced anti-bribery and compliance measures specified for the size of the business and show effective leadership commitment to corporate ethics and integrity. Gold. Complete an independent compliance and due diligence verification and review by the Ethics First Compliance Advisory Committee.
Very much for that video, and as a follow-up to that video, we have yet another video. Okay. Okay, moving along. At this point in time, I want to give you some quick highlights that will be coming on much later in the program, and the reasons why we have them. A quick update on the essence of the ABEC Ambassador Challenge. 14 different companies entered for the ABEC Ambassador Challenge. Some have submitted their required documents, and the finalists at the end of the 3-day event will be announced. And we're also going to be having a 3-minute pitch challenge where different potential brands and individuals will come and pitch their ideas to the general audience. And 5 winners will be selected and announced on December 9th, the day 3 of this year's event. And they will be given 3 minutes to explain their business, and from that pitch, 5 of them will be picked as winners, and we'll announce that at the last day of this event. Also, we'll be having breakout sessions, different breakout sessions. And if you observe on your screen, we'll be sending out information on how to be part of the various breakout sessions of your choice. We'll send it in the chat box. So please pay attention to the chat box. Once the chat box is sent, you'll be given links on how to be part of the various breakout sessions that we'll be having. And these breakout sessions include the following: transparency and accountability in public procurement and spending. Participants attending virtually should look in the chat section, as I mentioned, and click on the link below titled Transparency and Accountability in Public Procurement and Spending. And another breakout session you have is titled The Supply of Corruption, Prioritizing Ethics and Integrity in the Business Culture. And participants too who are interested in that should also look at the chat session and click on the link below on the subject matter, and they will be taken directly to the particular room where this topic will be discussed. And we'll also have a live stream session on APEC Africa, Facebook and YouTube, SEP Kenya, Facebook and YouTube. That will be a live stream session too that will be going on as well. So these various breakout sessions will be happening simultaneously, And as I mentioned, you just need to look at the chat box. You'll be sent the link, and you just click on the link that appeals to you, and you will be joining the session. Now, live here at the podium here, live with us, we'll be having a panel discussion on the subject matter, corruption in the maritime sector. And this panel session that will be happening live here at the Chambers venue of the Chambers of Commerce here in Lagos, Nigeria, we have the following panelists. Mr. Segun Olusoji Ababa, the CEO CBI. We'll be having Professor Ayodeji Olukoju from the Federal University of Lagos. We'll be having Vivek Menon, Head of Collective Action Partnerships, Maritime Anti-Corruption Network. Hello, Executive Secretary, CEO, Nigeria Shippers Council, NSC. And also to be in this panel will be Josh Raul Perels, the Deputy Director, Global Alliance for Trade Facilitation. And finally on this list will be Dr. Ike Nawosu, who will be the moderator for this particular panel session. So we want to tune in to that as it happens back to back. So I want to believe we are getting ready for, or the various panel sessions are ready. I want to believe the links have been sent in the various chat boxes for our general audience to be part of. And the discussion on transparency and accountability in procurement, we'll be having the following panelists on that for that session. Dr. Joe Abba, Country Director, DAI International Development. We'll be having Maureen Kariuki, Open Government Partnership. We have Kerry Klotz, Head of Country Programs, Open Contracting Partnership, OCP. We have Abisola Kazim, Office of Compliance Advisor and Ombudsman, International Finance Corporation, IFC. We have Mr. Fatai Idowu Onofowote, Head of Lagos State Public Procurement Authority, PPA. We have Mrs. Uwa Osa Obo, Head Corporate Development, Capital Compliance, Nigeria, and Dr. Olusegun Omisaki, Director of Research and Government Economics, Nigeria Economic Summit Group. These are those that will be part of the panel discussion on transparency and accountability in procurement. And we also have the business ethic panel would have the following individuals: Mrs. Mojisola Bakare, General Manager, Corporate Banking, Sterling Bank PLC. We have Mr. Ayola Olukani, Director General, Nigeria Association of Chambers of Commerce, Industry, Mines, and Agriculture, NACSIMA. We have Lisa Miller, Integrity Compliance Officer, World Bank Integrity, Vice Presidency. We have Anthony Ware, Principal, Anti-Bribery and Corruption Compliance, Africa and Middle East Standard Chartered Bank. We have Scott Esner, President, U.S. Africa Business Center, U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And finally, on this list on business ethic panel, we have Ike Mbaku, Senior Consultant, IOD Center for Corporate Governance, who will be the moderator of this session. So ladies and gentlemen, right about now, we'll be joining the various sessions as they happen simultaneously. And as I did say, look at the chat box. The links will be sent. All you just need to do is click on the link to be part of the various sessions that appeals to you. After which, at about 2:45 or thereabout, we shall be coming back to this live station to give you further parts of the day's program. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, for those of us who are reaching us live from the LCCI venue here, we want to hook on to the panel session that will be happening here on corruption in the maritime sector. And as I mentioned earlier, this session will be handled or will be moderated by Dr. Ikena Wonsu. So if Dr. Ikena is here with us, please, sir, can you come up to the podium and take a seat? Please, it's not out of order if we give him a round of applause too. Thank you, sir. Thank you for coming, sir. Thank you. And to be joining Dr. Ikena, before I hand over the mic to him, we have Mrs. Olusoji Abapa, the CEO, CIB. I don't know if Mr. Olusoji is here with us. Okay, not yet. Maybe we'll be joining. Professor Ayodeji Olukoju, yes, from the Federal University of Lagos. Okay, we're still expecting. Vivek Menon, Head of Collective Action Partners. Oh, okay. Okay. Well, Prof is joining us online. Did I get that well? Oh, fantastic. Welcome, sir. Welcome, sir. Good. Professor Ayodeji online with us. You're welcome, sir. Welcome, sir. Then we have also joining us on the stage here.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Vivek Menon, Head of Collective Action Partnership, Maritime Anti-Corruption Network. We also have Mr. Hassan Bello, Executive Secretary, CEO, Nigerian Shippers Council. I heard he's ably represented, if I'm not mistaken. He's represented, Mr. Hassan Bello. Okay, please, a round of applause for Madam. Sorry, I don't have your name, ma'am. When you come up, Dr. Wonsu will do us the honors. You're welcome, ma'am. Then we also have Josh Raul Pereles, Deputy Director, Global Alliance for Trade Facilitation. Okay, so at about this time, I'll hand over to the moderator for this session, Dr. Ikena, as he takes us through the subject matter, corruption in the maritime sector.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, our distinguished audience, domestic and global, it is my pleasure, my privilege to be here to speak to this topic and moderate the session. I have a distinguished panel, a presenter, and 4 panelists. The topic we have today is on tackling corruption in the maritime industry. In most other parts of the world, the maritime industry is a major contributor to the global GDP of the nation. So, for us to discuss this and see how we can increase the contribution of Nigeria's maritime sector, Africa's maritime sector, rather, to the global economy, to the continental economy, rather. Mr. Soji Apampa will be the presenter to present the position paper for the panelists to discuss. Now, Soji, whom I have known for quite a while, a very thorough professional, is the CEO of Convention on Business Integrity. He co-founded this convention in 1997 and is an executive director there and serves as a consultant on the CB projects. He has served as the senior advisor to the UN Global Compact on the 10th principle, which is anti-corruption, and is a consultant to the Interagency Task Force, a task team of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, tasked with the responsibility of developing national strategy to combat corruption. And in his role, he has undertaken many numerous assignments for international organizations, including the World Bank and UN bodies. So, Mr. Pampa, you're welcome. We have Professor Ayodeji. You're welcome, sir. Yes, we have Mr. Professor Ayodeji Olukoju, who is a distinguished professor of history at the University of Lagos, majoring in maritime and economic history. He is also the Pro-Chancellor and Chairman of Council of Chrisland University at Abeokuta in Nigeria, and a Fellow of the Nigerian Academy of Letters. He was Visiting Research Fellow of the Japan Foundation, British Academy, the DAAD in Germany, the Institute of Developing Economies in Tokyo, the Chapman and Leventis Foundations in the UK, the Water Travel grantee at Emory University, and a member of the Governing Council of the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs, as well as an advisory board member of the African Peace Building Network in New York. He's on the editorial board of several magazines, including the Journal of African History, African Economic History, Africa Zamani, and History Africa. And he is the first African professor on the executive committee of the International Maritime History Association. As a prolific writer with several publications in leading journals, we welcome Professor Ayodeji Olukoju to this distinguished panel. Thank you, sir. The third panelist.
Thanks, sir.
You're welcome. The third panelist is Mr. Hassan Bello. Mr. Hassan Bello is the Executive Secretary and the Chief Executive Officer of the Nigerian Shippers Council. Hassan is a lawyer, and he joined the Nigerian Shippers Council in 1998 as a Deputy Director and the head of the Legal Services Department. He became a director in the same department, rising to that level through dint of hard work, and a position he held for many years before becoming the Executive Secretary and the CEO of the Nigerian Shippers Council. Before that appointment, before joining the council actually, Mr. Bello had worked with the Sokoto State Ministry of Justice in Nigeria and the Sokoto State Investment Company Limited, where he also rose to become the acting managing director and chief executive. Mr. Hassan Bello is ably represented today by Mrs. Ada Okam, who is the Director of Special Duties. You're welcome, madam. And we have Vivek Memon. Vivek Menon is the head of Collective Action Partnerships, Maritime Anti-Corruption Network. Vivek is fully involved in the collective action programs within the regions of Europe, Middle East, and Africa. He is primarily responsible for collective action projects in the West African region with focus on Nigeria. He's also responsible for the development and the launch of the Global Port Integrity Index, which measures the level of integrity in ports worldwide. A very important initiative, if I may add. Vivek is a master mariner with more than 20 years of experience in the maritime industry, including sailing as a officer aboard various merchant ships worldwide. Vivek Menon, you're welcome to this event. Thank you.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Okay, and then the last but not the least, Jose Raul Perales is the Deputy Director of the Global Alliance for Trade Facilitation, GATF, at the Center for International Private Enterprise, CIPE. He oversees a team of experts involved in the design and implementation of all in-country projects and serves on the management team of the Alliance. Prior to joining the CIPE, Mr. Perales served as the Assistant Secretary for the private sector at the United States Department of Homeland Security. Jose Perales, you're very much welcome to the panel session. I hope he's online with us. Now, I have 5 minutes to shape the conversation.
Tackling corruption to reduce poverty and unemployment and insecurity in Africa. And for our panel, we're dealing with the supply side of corruption, prioritizing ethics and integrity in business. And here we're basically talking about trying to promote an ethical culture. I won't go over all the background that has already been given us in terms of corruption and the benefits and so on. I just want to just raise one or two points which perhaps will help us when we're making our comments. We all basically know that when we're talking about corruption, it is something that in our own part of the world, in Nigeria, it's almost taken for granted that it is something that exists. And what we intend to do with this conference is to see how best to moderate corruption so that we can enjoy some of the benefits that exist when you moderate corruption. And our panelists here are all people of extreme and special knowledge and will help us in trying to demonstrate some of these benefits, and then also to talk about some of the techniques that we can use in moderating corruption. I think for me, the most important issues when you talk about corruption is that you must have the right tone at the top, you must have leadership commitment, and then you must have the capacity to comply. You must have the ways to comply. And there are several anti-bribery compliance programs that are available. And I think one of our panelists here will highlight some of these. So without further ado, I'll just quickly go through the panelists that we have here. Most of us have already seen each other on the screen. We have Ambassador Ayola Ulukani, who is the Director General of the Nigerian Association of Chambers of Commerce, Industry, Mines, and Agriculture. Ambassador, you're welcome, and we're hoping that with your great experience in different countries, such as Austria and Australia, you will be able to help us when we're talking about how best to implement anti-corruption in Nigeria, because those countries that you've been in, I know that they're in the top 20 in terms of the perception index, in the sense that there are countries that are seen to be very strong in terms of the level of corruption. They are not corrupt countries. Okay. Secondly, we have Moji Bakare, who is the division head at Sterling Bank in corporate banking. And again, she will be in a position to tell us a lot more about how to build an ethical culture, especially where you have younger staff who perhaps are only used to a particular way of doing things. Moji is an alumni of the INSEAD Fontainebleau in France, and she has quite a lot of experience in this area, and hopefully we will be able to learn a lot. We have Lisa Miller. Lisa is the World Bank Group Integrity Compliance Officer, and she heads the Integrity Compliance Unit in the World Bank. And here we expect that she will be in a strong position to help us to talk about capacity and how to basically incentivize entities to work on moderating corruption. And she will be able to help us talk about mentoring organizations and creating programs in which companies can build their integrity and their ethics. And then last but not the least, we have Anthony Waire, who is a subject matter specialist in the fight against bribery and corruption. He's a seasoned financial crimes compliance professional and a certified fraud examiner. And he's worked in a number of regional banks in Africa where he's held very strong positions in anti-money laundering. And of course, we will be leaning on him when we talk about the compliance programs and perhaps some of the things that we can do to improve compliance. Okay, great. I think that's basically where we are. For myself, I've done quite a lot of work in business ethics. And in fact, the last program I facilitated was for Sterling Bank, where I talked about building a business ethics culture. So we'll go straight to Moji, who has a presentation to make. She's making the lead presentation for us in this group. So Moji, over to you so that we can save time. I'm sorry that it's taken so long.
Thank you very much. I want to first and foremost apologize to everyone here. I understand how you feel, Ambassador. We've all had a very long day, and because no one told us that we're going to be going into breakout sessions. So I feel the same way you feel, but I will, my presentation is really meant to take 20 minutes, but I will try, to reduce it from that so that we can gain some value. I want to thank my Managing Director, Abubakar Suleiman, the Managing Director of Sterling Bank, who I'm representing here today. He actually got the invite and believes that I'll be able to do justice to the subject matter. And I do hope that I'm able to do justice to it. So I would not take too much of a time. So the topic I want to give the lead presentation on is the value of business ethics and integrity, advocacy in addressing the supply side of corruption. I would have shared the screen, but the host is not allowing for sharing of screen. I won't even go there. So I will just go through it with us. Right. So when we talk of ethics and integrity in business, the key things that we would look at is business ethics flow from personal values. People with integrity normally will have strong moral compass. They keep their words and take full responsibility for their actions, even in uncomfortable situations. In business contexts, ethics and integrity are reflected in probity. A principled business person aligns his personal integrity with the way he conducts business. Of course, when we talk about business integrity, we also realize that this impinges on the company's performance. A business will perform better where employees display moral conduct in dealing with customers, internal and external. There are some basic don'ts of business integrity. Acting with integrity can prove difficult in adverse situations. When business struggles, we should never resort to practices and strategies that promise a short-term gain at the cost of integrity. Failing to treat each customer with the same baseline of respect is a major don't in business. We should not underpay or mistreat staff because we believe that we have the upper hand as employers. We should never mislead our clients or misrepresent the services and our capabilities as companies. We should never oversell and underdeliver. A lot of times when we try to oversell, we underdeliver. So stay to your area of competence and focus. We should never fake reviews and run adverts that mislead the public. We should always think about what we as individuals and your business stand for before committing to something we may regret, because we cannot hold on to those things. So next we look at why business integrity matters. It matters really because when you put a business on the foundation of business integrity, this gives competitive edge. Trust is not earned easily these days as clients are becoming warier of the businesses they choose to interact with. Companies that live their values are the ones people will patronize. If you deliver quality, play fair, clients and order transparency and offer serious transparency in your business, you are guaranteed customer retention and loyalty. Save faces, there's a need for us to always take responsibility for errors, and this normally generates empathy and lets our clients know we will always be open with them no matter the situation. Simplifies difficult decisions. Each time we face a difficult business decision and choose to follow the moral compass, it is a positive step. Consequently, the process becomes easier and results in less decision fatigue. And of course, this costs less and run long while running a business with integrity. It may seem costly, a costly investment, but it's an investment worth it. Lack of integrity only leads to short-term wins, and those short-term wins are definitely not sustainable. So you want to build your business on the foundation of sustainability. So favorable publicity, bad news, they say travels fast, right? But it's always very important that on the reverse, when you do some good, right, your customers and your internal stakeholders and external stakeholders will know that you have acted with integrity, and this helps you to secure favorable mentions in social media and bring in word of mouth recommendation, which is very important these days, right? And when We go on to dimensioning business integrity. Again, trust has been at the foundation of all that we have discussed today. Almost everybody has harped on trust. Regardless of the business type, engaging with customers entails entering a mutual relationship of trust. Trust is in short supply these days, so we must make honesty, transparency priorities in our businesses. Consistency. Integrity in business cannot be changed on the whim of your morals. This should not depend on the situation of convenience, like I said earlier. Ownership is also very important. The ability to admit a mistake and face the consequences head-on is a highly desirable quality in business. It takes really serious guts for business to acknowledge when they have made mistakes, and in this environment now, people actually will show empathy to your business. Collectivity, with business growth comes an increase in employees, ensuring that each hire contributes correct personal values, while assuming a moral responsibility for them ensures a collective mindset. Evolution. As the workplace and culture evolves and standards also evolve, right? We should always allow headspace for your integrity to grow and evolve and stay open to continuous learning and improvement as you, your business, and the world around you changes. But the foundation of integrity must be held constant in the company. Very important to demonstrate business integrity. We have the culture. The ability for us to create and maintain the culture of integrity. For customers, we definitely must be customer-centric. It has to be the approach that we will serve. We will serve with quality for every touch point we have. Quality must be the watchword. Transparency, we can't say enough about that. We must be open about workflow, processes, and culture. Given, we should show love and give back to the community. It's very important. As we show love and give back to the community, the staff we work with would see this, and that will be imbibed in their culture. So business ethics and employees, right? When employees imbibe the ethics of honesty, integrity, and the entire organization stands to benefit. But this must be clearly driven by clearly defined KPIs. We must define performance. We must measure performance. We must communicate acceptable behavior. We must communicate rewards appropriately, compensation and rewards appropriately. In the same vein, we must communicate sanctions where necessary. Sanctions all the time, we must make sure that we communicate sanctions and we apply the sanctions. So I took another look at some reports in terms of corruption. A lot has been said about it. So I will just take a few slides. Global threat, 120 countries with average score of 43 on the Global Corruption Perception Index. 49 firms and individuals were debarred by the World Bank Group in 2020 due to corrupt practices, 1,000 to date. $1.26 trillion, that's the cost of corruption in developing countries. The cost of corruption to EU is about $159 billion. A lot of this has been said to us from Transparency International even today. In Africa, sadly though, 1 in 4 Africans had to pay a bribe to access public services in 2018. Young people aged 18 to 34, more likely to pay bribes than people greater than 55, which is so sad because these are our future, right? Our future of tomorrow should have better morals because we are expected to have, imbibe that culture of better morals in them. In sub-Saharan Africa, the average score of 32 in 2019 corruption index is really nothing to write home about. And moving on to that, it's been said that the cost of corruption affects more Africans on the lower end of the income spectrum, which is also very sad because the poorer people are more susceptible to corruption, which makes all of us poor at the end of the day. So if you're rich and you are surrounded by this cost of corruption eroding the development of the economy, because a lot of these funds that go into corruption could have been used for development, which I will call the heart of Nigeria. Interventions in health, education, agriculture, renewable energy, and transportation, to mention just a few, of that. Right? The supply side, which is where we are focusing our conversation on today. What is the supply side of corruption? The supply side of corruption refers to persons or entities who offer or provide the illicit benefits in corrupt transactions. The demand and supply side. Conversely, for me, I believe you cannot remove the demand side from the supply side. Yes, the supply side enhances the demand side, but I believe that if the demand side are able to imbibe and inculcate and have at the foundation and the core of their values, some of the values that most supply side have put in place, this will help us to balance, corruption and eliminate completely corruption in our environment. What drives this corruption? This demand side does not imply that it is the official on the receiving end who proactively solicited the bribe. The distinction between the supply and demand is intrinsic to the incentives that contribute to corruption. Like I said, what do we do? What are the next steps for us to do? While our focus here at either being on the supply side, government trying to control its own officials, our discussion today will focus on how the supply side can start tackling, corruption, and start not by imbibing wrong norms, but by imbibing the right norm that there is no to corruption, which I call war against corruption, via strong advocacy efforts. I have listed a few advocacy efforts here, and this will be my last slide. So how do we tackle corruption through advocacy, right? I believe it's very pertinent for us to ratify, implement anti-corruption laws, right? So we need our lawmakers to be able to help us, by ensuring that we bring up the right laws that the executive will give the assent to, which will help us to drive the war against corruption permanently within our country. We need to investigate, sanction, or reported corruption cases. We should not give room for impunity in our economy, either in Nigeria or other African countries. We need a judiciary to be able to help us here and help us in enforcing, the rule of law as with the law. We need to develop minimum standard of ethical procurement. So the procurement processes, there has to be transparency and clarity around that at every point in time. So citizens' complaints, we need to collect citizens' complaints, strengthen whistleblower protection. Whistleblower protection. It's very important. When you want to encourage people, to be able to speak up, you need to make sure that the protection around whistleblowing is very, very intact. Else people will be afraid to come out. There has to be protection for whistleblower, and there has to be emphasis on that. We also need to enable media to hold government accountable, right? The media is supposed to be the conscience of the people. We need to ensure that we allow the media to do their work without fear. And of course, I want to note a sign of warning to the media as well. The media also have to continuously be responsible to those responsibilities. We need to engage actively. This engagement boils out from the fact that we have to ensure that we have stakeholders forum where we allow people to speak up against wrongdoing in any and every quarter. We should give room, good leadership gives room for followers to be able to give them feedback. And this feedback, we have to have a metrics in place to ensure that these are properly measured. And the last but not the least I'm going to speak to is digitization. When we digitize all the processes, we make it very difficult for corruption to thrive. If you can access any service of any private or public organization from the tab of your telephone on an app, it makes corruption almost impossible. And it also, attracts foreign investors into the country for investment because you have definitely created a level standard for everybody to operate. I want to say thank you, and I look forward to us having more engagements on the supply side of corruption as we go into today's panel discussion. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Muji. Thank you very much. That was really very good. Thank you.
Mr. Ike, I'm sorry to obstruct you. So sorry.
Yes, Imabam.
Yes, in 2 or 3 minutes, move you to the correct breakout session. Okay. So please just allow 2 minutes to be moved to the correct breakout session. Thank you, everyone.
So we'll hold on then. All right, go ahead.
And a few of them have had the pleasure of listening to Moji's presentation because they were in sort of the lobby, and now they're joining us. So we'll certainly hear more diverse background and perspectives on this issue. The actual moderator, Mr. Mbagu, is also on the call, so I'll just give him a minute to indicate to me that he's ready for me to hand over the baton here, so that he can also give us some perspective on Moji Sola Bakare's speech. Ike, if you're ready to proceed, I'm happy to sort of give a summary of what Lisa's covered and what Scott's discussed and hand over to you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for joining us. Thank you so much. Sincere apologies for the technical hitch. I'm very glad to hand over to the moderator for this panel, Mr. Ike. Ike, just quickly before I hand over to you, I'll just quickly let you know, Lisa has done an excellent introduction of the topic, and so has Scott. Lisa has covered it from a very technical perspective about the value and importance of compliance, the issues of capacity, and the adequacy of a compliance program for a large company and for small companies that are the majority in Africa and in Nigeria. And Scott has talked about it also from the perspective of, the importance of anti-corruption in the business sector that encourages competition, but also strengthens governance. And I believe I wouldn't do justice to all they covered, so I'll hand over to you very quickly so that we can continue the conversation and you can have them give some more input. So thank you all so much for being patient, and I'm glad to hand over to you, Ike. Please take it away.
Thank you very much, Lola. Well, let me also just quickly brief on what Moji has said to us in the lobby. I think I didn't realize we were in the lobby, but Moji talked essentially about business integrity, and she outlined, some of the important elements of business integrity. She talked about some of the things that will help in creating a much better environment. For example, she mentioned digitization and talked about the fact that digitization will help to improve transparency because it will also make information more easily available and will make it very difficult for information to be hidden in any way. She talks about performance, and she cited the fact that companies with good business integrity and with good business ethics tend to perform a lot better. And indeed, there are quite a number of studies that have shown that companies that have strong ethical backgrounds tend to perform a lot better. She also highlighted the question about supply side of corruption, and then she mentioned the demand side of corruption, because if you have supply, you will have demand, and without demand, you probably may not have so much supply either. Supply side of corruption that we are used to being essentially the bribery, and then the demand side being those that come from agencies of perhaps more of agencies of the government and so on. Then on the private sector side, she talked about how to build an ethical culture and some of the elements that are required, to do that, some of the mechanisms that should be put in place in order to do that. Okay, so I think those are some of the things that we talked about, and I know that we're a bit pushed, so I'm going to ask that we have each member of the panel give us a little bit of an insight into some of the areas that can be helped. I don't know if Ambassador Lukani was here because he was talking about time, so I wanted to give him the first opportunity to comment on some of the things that we've heard. Ambassador, are you here?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much.
I hope you can hear. I hope you can.
Yes, we can.
Hear me?
Yes, we can. We can. We can hear you.
Okay. Sorry. I mean,
so
yeah. Somehow I got shifted, onto another platform. I mean,
I'm so sorry about
let
that.
me quickly just say thank you. It's an honor to be here. I feel highly, it's okay. I feel highly honored to be here, and I think this is indeed a very important event for us. Quickly, I would say that for us in NACIMA, the whole question of corruption, fighting corruption is real, and one of our code of ethics, I think we say that to shun any form of abuse of office, bribery, and corruption. It's key, it's very important for the Chambers movement. Right from, we are Nigerian Association of Chambers of Commerce, national chambers. So that means we are all over the country, composed of city chambers, state chamber, and the question of fighting corruption and ensuring transparency in our business transaction is key and very important for us. I thought I should make that very, very clear. And I think, especially what we had from Mrs. Mujisola Bakari and others who have spoken when we were in the plenary, has said it all. This is not a new issue for us. Indeed, if you look at the history of the very first coup by those young people who are described as a revolutionary, visionary, it was the issue of corruption. It was one of the things that motivated them. So that is how important it is, and we've had figures in terms of the connection between corruption as well as poverty, as well as the question and crisis of our country. So it is key. I think that we don't have it. I think there are so many instruments that run in terms of fighting corruption. Because the key issue has always been implementation, and effective sanction. I would like to quickly just make reference.
It looks like we've lost you briefly. Okay, it looks like we've lost Ambassador Lukani briefly. Is everybody else? Can everybody else still hear?
Yes, I can hear you. I think we lost the ambassador.
Okay. We're here with you.
Okay, we've lost him briefly. So I think what we'll do is we'll go on, and if he comes back in, and then we'll have him round up. Yeah. So can I ask Mr. Anthony Wyrie, because I think he's the only one who hasn't spoken so far. So Anthony, are you there?
Yes, I can.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. So can we ask you to comment a little bit on this issue about compliance in particular? Because without the compliance, it will be very difficult to actually go on to moderate corruption. And as we're hearing from almost everybody, this issue of corruption really needs to be tackled in order for us to enjoy the benefits, particularly in Nigeria and of course in Africa, as we know. So please go ahead. You've had the benefit of hearing from the other people.
Yes, okay. Thanks, IK, for that. And thank you for joining this wonderful session. I believe it's a very timely topic, especially for us Africans. Now, I'll speak probably briefly from a large corporate's point of view, and especially focusing on multinationals and why we are very keen on compliance programs, especially anti-bribery and corruption compliance programs. Now, if you look at, say, like recent enforcement action, say, for example, there was the Airbus issue that they were fined $5.9 billion early in January. You will see that they were fined this because of bribing foreign government officials using various third parties, using their various business partners to carry out these bribes. Now, and when you look at various other enforcement actions against other, large corporates and multinationals, you will see more so a similar thing. Now, multinationals are really, they have to comply with very stringent anti-bribery and corruption laws. For example, there's a UK, United Kingdom Bribery Act, there's a United States Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, and various other bribery acts and laws outside there in every country where they operate. And so this means that for you to engage as, say, business partner of a multinational, you will need to have in place an anti-bribery and corruption compliance program. Now, I'm looking at various small and medium-sized enterprises, say, across Africa right now. I know, there's the challenge of many of them will not have the benefit, nor the capacity to have fully fledged compliance teams and also, say, bribery and corruption programs and what have you. They don't have actually that capacity, and it might also be very expensive for them to implement some of these programs. So one solution for this would be, of course, a collaborative approach between us in the larger corporates, multinationals, working together with the SMEs, probably through business associations, such as, say, say the various private sector alliances, the chambers of commerce in our individual countries, to just come together and, for us as large corporates to share our expertise with small and medium-sized enterprises at, say, a minimal or even no cost at all. Because, say, for example, from my end, I would be willing, to go down and, train SMEs, help them come up with simplified bribery and corruption programs. And because this will really benefit them at the end of the day. They are the ones who are really affected by corruption across Africa. That effect is disproportional to them. We have heard of how, say, corruption adds to the cost of business. Approximately, say, 25% of the cost of procurement, say, contracts is increased just because of corruption, so that, now this additional bit can cover kickbacks, say, to various government agencies and what have you. So from my point of view, private sector, we are very important in this fight against corruption. Government sector, being the demand side, really gets the supply from us as private sector. And so we will need to look deep into ourselves, assist each other, and really come up with more of a collaborative approach to fight this menace of corruption across Africa. Thanks, Ike.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Anthony. And, some of the things that you have spoken to, I think that I would like to have to ask Scott to please, make a comment, because I noted that when Lola was giving a summary of what Scott talked about, he talked about the importance of anti-corruption and how strengthening governance. And just for some of us who perhaps don't know, Scott is the president of the US Africa Business Center. And I think that, this is a very important center in terms of talking about some of the benefits of having such programs. So, so please, Scott, if you could just give us, your own intake. I know that you're short of time, so we'd like to have your full benefit of your presence here.
Sure, no problem, and thanks, Ike, and everyone else for the panel today. I've made some opening remarks, so I don't want to repeat myself too much, but what I had said earlier, and knowing the tech difficulty, was at least in the United States, and when we look towards foreign markets, regardless of where they're located, Latin America, Africa, Asia, we have something called the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act that really does give us a shield as a gold standard against corruption. Now, does corruption still occur and happen? Yes, certainly so. But as a government, we've put in place at least a indemnification locally domiciled in different parts around the world. We can then, in some ways, help them defend their own interests by passing that same standard of FCPA to them, noting that I could get put in jail for corrupt activities. They, as vendors, could also be held accountable in certain jurisdictions to the level of standards of accountability. So I think it gives them an opportunity all the way from large to small corporations saying, I want to have the best ethical standards possible as a corporation. I want to adhere to global norms. And I know the United States does have a Foreign Corrupt Practices Act law that does indemnify them, or at least helps to try to get them away, deal with corruptions. And it's very simple. I've had many a company come to me and say, hey, I walked into a minister's office or into an office of government standing. The first question was, I just had a competitor in here from another nation not to be disclosed that was willing to do X. What's your offer on the table? And they're like, look, I'm part of the American, business construct. I have shareholder value. I have, ethics and rules of law that I adhere to. And I have a Foreign Corrupt Practices Act that doesn't allow me to even enter into this discussion. So I'm going to have to leave today because I don't want my reputation to be held to this. So I think, ultimately money goes where money is welcome. And from I think an American or standpoint, we go where we know we can do business ethically and in compliance with the rule of law. I would say to anyone who's on this call that's dealing with these issues, say you're in talks with doing business with an American company, and due to our regulations, you cannot enter into a conversation around corruption. I would wish that other competitors of national standing around the world would similarly put down, both at the government level and the sub-government level, the reality that FCPA compliance is something that we should all try to adhere to. It should be governed with transparency. But for us, for American corporations to deal with transparency and corruption on the continent, and I would just hope that as governments are thinking through regulations, that they don't put into their books through regulations that gifts are allowed up to a certain denomination, because it just opens the door to further discussions about, well, how big of a gift can I give you? And I know that there's been cases around PIB in Nigeria and some other instances where it's been written into the laws that gifts are part of a cultural norm and should be allowed to be given, but it just opens that door far too wide to say, well, how big of a gift can I give? So thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much, Scott. At this point, Lisa, I hope Lisa is still here with us. I know she's made her comments already, but I'd like to invite Lisa to talk a little bit about how the World Bank integrity standards and how the integrity compliance officer's role can help in some of the things that we're talking about, because we're saying that there are benefits to working with integrity and imbibing good ethical operations. So could I ask Lisa to make some comments on this?
Sure, thank you so much, IK. And like Scott, I know Scott and I spoke to a smaller group, repeat too much, but just a very high-level summary. The World Bank Group Integrity Compliance Office primarily works with companies that have been found to have engaged in fraud and corruption under bank group finance projects, and have gone through our internal administrative sanction system, have been sanctioned. So, for example, debarred for a certain period of time where they're ineligible to participate under bank finance projects. But very importantly, the default sanction at the bank group now is a debarment with conditional release, meaning that the companies now cannot regain their eligibility to participate under bank finance projects until they've undertaken some rehabilitative measures. And that typically requires companies to develop and show implementation of an integrity compliance program that's consistent with the integrity compliance guidelines. And what I think is important for the discussion today is those guidelines don't just apply to companies that have been sanctioned by the bank group. They are based on recognized international standards, the guidance coming out of, Scott mentioned the US Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, also the UK Bribery Act, the OECD, and others. So they're common principles. And so I think it's important for us to think of those principles as really being something that all companies can use to enhance their compliance postures. So taking those principles and adapting them to each company's circumstances is critical. And that goes to the discussion we've been having about the multinationals and the SMEs. When we review a compliance program from our office's perspective, we expect the program to address each of the principles in the World Bank Group Integrity Compliance. But we are mindful that how a company's program addresses those principles will be different, in each case. We don't expect an SME to have the same program that a multinational will have. And that's why I really appreciated Anthony's comments where, the multinationals have a role to play here too. They can work with the SMEs in developing a program that's appropriate for the SME. And there's one example I often give where when you think about the common principles, I do think there's a common thread that should go across all the compliance programs globally, with standard principles. So one thing that we expect is a company to put in place, well, it's one, to mandate reporting. So if you think some ethical breach has occurred, you must report it as an employee of the company. And then the company is to have in place a mechanism for that reporting. That mechanism should allow for or ensure confidentiality. If you report, the report will be maintained in confidence. The company will ensure that there will not be retaliation for good faith reports. And the company will allow for anonymous reporting if it's allowed under the applicable law. So when we look at a multinational, we expect the multinational to have all the bells and whistles. You have you have a telephone line and multiple languages operating 24/7. You have a link on your intranet and your external website where someone can click and submit a report. But then you look at these, maybe a 10, 20 person company. It's not realistic. Some of those companies may not even have an intranet. So the link, you're not going to expect them to set up an entire system for this. So what we expect is that the company will build into its program the obligation to report, will ensure confidentiality, will ensure non-retaliation. But in some cases, maybe their reporting mechanism is a box in their office where people can submit reports. Maybe it is just, some type of internal phone line, but again, it's right sizing these principles to adapt to each company's risk profile and circumstances. And Scott mentioned gifts, and gifts are challenging because, the reality is there are some cultures where gift giving is really expected. And I agree with Scott, allowing it opens the door. But we also, working as we do globally, we need to be very mindful of cultural nuances. So where there is an allowance for gifts, we are very careful to take a hard look at what controls are placed around that. Is there a threshold? What kind of accounting mechanisms, auditing mechanisms are in place to try to detect abuse? So it really is, again, it has to be very carefully tailored to each company's circumstances. And I think that is where these type of regional discussions are so helpful, because it's considering the regional specificities and really trying to help companies adapt a program that comports with their realities. So I really look forward to hearing a bit more from other folks in the region as to how their programs have been adapted to particular circumstances on the continent. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Lisa. I think that was very helpful. Incidentally, I do have some experience with a company in Nigeria which had been recently barred from the World Bank financing. So it's something that we can discuss later on, and they're working on trying to rehabilitate. Okay, thank you very much. Can I ask for Ambassador? I don't know if Ambassador Lukani is still here, and Muji is still here, definitely. So let me just put a question that I can see on the chat box at this stage before we begin to round up. There's a question about how compliance systems and programs are not very popular to majority of companies here in Nigeria, and that's true. Okay, hello, how are you, sir? You're here. So this question is for yourself and Muji. So I'll just give you a couple of minutes each to take a look at it, because you're likely to be in a position to comment on this. And the question is that because a number of companies in Nigeria are not particularly fond of compliance systems and programs, how can the multinationals help the local companies in Nigeria develop these capacities to adapt to their needs? I think it's been spoken to a little bit by Scott and Lisa and Anthony to some extent, but I'd like to get your own opinions, as people on the ground, if I may use that phrase. So can we get some input from you? We're almost at the time when we'll be taking questions anyway. So, Ambassador, let's take you first, and then we'll come to Muji. Okay, Muji, maybe we'll go to you. Ambassador seems to have gone off again.
Yes, thank you, IK, and thank you, Lisa and Scott. Unfortunately, when I did my lead presentation, it was in another room. But I mean, basically, it just shows that we're all aligned in terms of thinking as to what really needs to be done, right? And that is gladdening to know that there's a consensus of mind in terms of what we need to do. Now to the particular question is, and Lisa mentioned this as well, that how do you help those companies, that don't have the resources for, ensuring that they have a good compliance system in place. I would say something which is very critical and fundamental. Doing the right thing is not something that should start from a process. It should be innate, right? Business integrity flows from personal values, and like I said earlier, people with integrity have strong moral compass. That strong moral compass is expected to flow into the business, right? And there are many businesses in Nigeria. I work in the banking sector, for instance, and in the banking sector, there are clearly defined norms of what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. So taken from the banking sector, right, we have customers. These SMEs and MSMEs, they are our customers. So we have a program where we are continuously educating, our customers on the need to do the right thing. I think what is most important is communication. We need to communicate the need for change in that culture of having the right integrity in place. What is the cost of corruption? That is the basis of it. The cost of corruption is so high, for Nigeria, for African countries. A lot of this monies that goes into private pockets, right, would ideally have gone into the development of the economy, the health sector, the education, agri sector, to mention a few. So we have to have like a given, approach to it. It has to be a fundamental CSR approach for us to take that responsibility of ensuring that every customer, you know, and talking from the banking perspective, every customer we have on our books who are doing different businesses, we currently have different models whereby we enable them to be able to put the right structures, you know, in place.
Thank you very much, Moji. I think I'll just make one comment on this, because I think everyone has made the comment that when you're implementing an anti-bribery and corruption program, it has to be something that is specific and contextual. Not every country will do it exactly the way that the other has done it, and therefore, when we implement such programs in countries where there's a gift culture, for example, you have to determine what exactly will become corruption and what will not be corruption. In fact, there's a program that I've been working on in Sudan, for example, where we were trying to help them to implement an anti-bribery and corruption program. And we talked about giving gifts and talked about how it could be corrupted. And you know, they said to us that giving gifts is actually part of their culture. So this program, we had to tweak the policy a little bit in order to make sure that the policy allows for their own cultural nuances to show, while also ensuring that, you know, it also moderates bribery and corruption. So there are so many different ways of doing this. And you know, one of the things that I also thought about is that corruption is not just bribery. It's all manner of actions, you know, just as the lead presenter, Andrew Wilson, mentioned at the beginning, nepotism, insider trading, you know, so many different types of things that are corruption. But, you know, sometimes the focus can be on just bribery. So I think, you know, those are some of the comments that I have to make. I'm going to ask, is Ambassador, are you able to come in now to make a comment? Okay, I think we don't have Ambassador, so I'm going to come to Anthony. Anthony, can we share some of your experiences, because you talked about something that was particularly interesting to me, and that's when you said a simplification of the compliance program. I think those were the exact words that you used, and this leads on from the comments that have been made by Moji and Scott and Lisa up till now. And I know that there's some very strong programs, you know, that can help, especially for the small and medium scale enterprises here in Nigeria. So Anthony, over to you.
Yes, okay, thank you so much. Yes, indeed, we will not expect, you know, say like as Lisa said, large corporates to, say smaller corporates to have similar compliance programs as larger corporates. Say, for example, in this case of gifts and entertainment, we actually allow some of this, you know, but it's on a risk-based approach, because in many of our countries, especially in Africa, you will find, I mean, giving gifts is, you know, one of the norms, I guess, across most of our countries in Africa. So we will perform, say, like a risk assessment and check, okay, what type of gifts and entertainment will we allow, up to what certain threshold? Of course, there are various other things which we will look at, such as, are these gifts and entertainment genuine? Are they reasonable? I mean, they should not be too lavish. So for example, you come to Kenya and I host you to this lavish, say like evening with the most expensive wine out there. And yet maybe there's some sort of a business deal that we are trying to, you know, reach an agreement, say like an agreement on. So such a gift entertainment expense, we will not allow that where I work, you know. So it's mostly on a case-by-case basis, but then there's a clear policy around what type of threshold do we allow, not only in Africa, but across the group, actually. And also, does this gift also have any nexus with a public official or a government official? I mean, that would be even much more risky for us. Now, coming to in terms of now simplifying these programs, I know that SIPE has done very good work on this. They normally have trainings with small and medium-sized enterprises. In some of these trainings, you will also find some of us larger corporates there just to assist them as well. And, and in that way, SMEs can be able to be helped to come up with much cheaper, like bribery and corruption programs. But again, they have to adhere to the various bribery and corruption laws in their country. And also, if they are, say, for example, a supplier of a multinational, they will also still have to adhere to the various international laws as well. So they can be tailored to that front, but then of course, we don't expect them to have, say, a whole compliance team behind, say, the ABC program and whatnot. So yes, indeed, it will be tailored to their specific requirements. Thanks, Ike.
Great. Thank you very much, Anthony. Okay, I just want to share one or two of the comments that are here in the chat box. There's a comment by Collins Okpara, and he says, how do we drive a strong behavioral change across the private and the public sector to further strengthen business integrity? This would be a question I would have loved Ambassador Olukani to take, because he has had cross experience, both private and culture. So I don't know if he's here. And Scott, okay, great. Scott, you're still here. Sure. I thought you had jumped off. So
no, that's all right. I'll jump in on this one. I think it starts. Quite honestly, it starts at the presidential level. If the president of the country, and I can look towards the Jacob Zuma era in South Africa. Oh, sorry.
Ambassador, I'll come back to you right away. Scott is just answering now, so I'll come back to you right away. Just give us a few minutes. Go ahead.
I want us to have another lull. Yeah, it really starts at the presidential level, right? If the president of the country, regardless of the country where you're in, sits back with an ethos that you're going to have the state for sale, then everyone below him thinks, or her, quite frankly, he or she, feels as though that's the acceptable behavior. And until that moderated behavior pattern changes, then this is going to be a systemic issue for decades and decades to come. You can look in Southeast Asia, you can look in Asia, you can look in the United States in certain localities that, if the top person in charge feels that corruption is a valuable part of their modus operandi, then everyone else below them thinks the same thing. So quite honestly, I mean, the only way to stem the tide of this is that the president or the person in charge of the government in that sector doesn't allow it, or if they do, there is the highest standard placed upon them and the longest jail sentence as possible, because unless people see that there is a negative effect to change their behavior, that it'll just continue on for years and years. So, I look at a market like South Africa where under President Zuma, years and years of corruption, graft, bribery were in place, and the weakening of the investor confidence in that market has really flowed for many years past that. If someone were to be thrown in jail at the most highest levels, I can tell you that overnight you would have a serious change in the way people would approach that issue. So to me, it's accountability at the top level, and that will change behavior below it.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Scott. I mean, Scott's saying the tone at the top and then leadership commitment. I think those are absolutely critical. And then sanctions, just as mentioned by quite a number of us. Okay, Ambassador, can we get your comment now? Ambassador?
I'm Mr.
Very good. So yes, sir. Go ahead, sir. Go ahead, sir. Let's take your own comment. The network is not too friendly.
I'm very sorry.
Not at all.
It's been the network is well, I'm very sorry, that has been on and off. I hope I don't get caught off again.
No problem.
When we said I was making reference to the question and issues of NACIMA itself, the issue of anti-corruption is one of the key issues there on our code of ethics, and that's it. And like I said, we have so many rules and regulations, but the problem is always the implementation. Let me quickly just make a reference to an article by Segun Adeniyi. I think it was about sometimes last week. He was talking about public trillions in private pockets. Public trillions in private pocket. And it was talking about the establishment in 2019 of a body comprising the EFCC and CPs to recover 5.7 trillion from old AMCON. And 3 trillion is owned by only 20 debtors. Again, 5.7 trillion to be owed by income, to be recovered, and only 20 people owe 3 trillion.
60%.
I mean, why and how did we allow all this? Yeah, how and how did we allow this? So that is where the question and issues of implementation is there. I served 35 years in the foreign service, and one of the instruments which I worked on when I was in Vienna was the UNCAC, the UN Convention Against Corruption, which is a landmark international law instrument as far as this issue is concerned. It is from there, of course, we have the International Anti-Corruption Academy, and of course also our ICPC and all that. Well, we have so many institutions. And like I said, each and every one of them, how far? I mean, see what has happened with the EFCC. It's so sad, but we cannot give up. We'll continue to work on it. I recently, of course, brought again the Nigerian Code of Ethics, 2000 Code of Governance. You saw what happened with KAMA too. It was one of the instruments which, of course, we used to try and say that, look, let us tackle this issue. You know, the direction it went in terms of the churches and others, So what I am saying is that let us faithfully implement all those instruments which we have. Like I said, it is not just for the absence of all those things. We must give it the go. We must at every level. And like you said, I served in Australia, and I also served 4 years in Tel Aviv. And I was also in Nairobi in Kenya for 4 years. And I remember when at that particular period, the Kibaki coalition ending, John Gitongo was PAMSEC for governance and ethics. But what happens after? So the question and issues of sustainability and effective implementation of the various instruments of anti-corruption, the issue is not to describe what is the effect of corruption. The challenge is to ensure that effectively, we implement all those rules and regulations. And if it becomes necessary to have special regulations, special courts, so be it. Because if we go through the regular courts and there are corruption cases are there for the next 5 years, of what use? So these are some of the issues. These are some of the things. I'm sorry I've been cut off, here and off today. And like I said, in Nasima, it's a key issue for us because the question of corruption in the private sector seems sometimes to be swept under the rug, as well as only the public sector. And that was why I made reference to the fact that 20 people are owing 3 trillion. How? I'm sorry to have been a little bit, disorganized as far as the technical, but I'm happy that I'm able to join you eventually. I think at the end of the day, the message, I think, of this event, the ABEC, is let us walk the talk. Thank you very much.
Excellent. I think you're saying the same thing that Scott said, essentially. The tone at the top has to be right. You cannot preach anti-corruption if things are not happening, correctly. Okay, can we maybe take two more questions, and then I'd like to round up. I'm not sure how much time we have left, but on the agenda we have just about 5 minutes or thereabouts, left. So I'd like to give, first of all, I'd like to give each one of us perhaps a minute or two, if we can be very brief, to just try to capture the essence of our own panel discussion. And if I can just remind us again.
You have about 10 more minutes to wrap up.
Oh, okay.
So you can actually take a few questions if you would like. I have some questions from social media for some of the speakers. And if you would like to take them, let me know.
Okay, yeah, we can go ahead. Do you want to just take them, and then we'll mention one or two of them, and then we'll ask our panelists, who would like to take them? Yeah, Lola, or should I just mention? I can see some on the chat box. Are those the ones that? Okay, Lola,
we have about 4 questions from social media. I can.
Okay. Yeah, please go ahead. I'll jot down some as you go ahead, and then we'll take our panelists.
Okay, great. All right. I'll just take the first one.
Okay. Sorry. Can you mute yourself, Ambassador? Ambassador, can you mute yourself?
Yes.
Okay. Lola, go ahead, please.
Okay, all right. So the first question, it reads, will it be a good idea for governments to adopt anti-corruption legislation from countries like China, where corruption is punishable by capital punishment? These extreme measures have reduced corruption to near zero, but there is also the moral question of do not murder. How can the two be balanced?
Yeah. That's one.
Second one.
Shall we take the question? Is there anyone who wants to attempt this one? Would you want to attempt?
Yes, I'll make an effort to attempt the question, but before doing that, unfortunately, a lot of members here were not at the other room where the presentation was made. You know, the advocacy efforts I spoke to that we need to put in place, to ensure that we tackle corruption. And I'll mention them. We need to ratify and implement anti-corruption laws. Very, very critical. We need our lawmakers to basically help us here, and definitely we'll have to get executive assent, for this. We need to ensure that we investigate and sanction reported corruption cases appropriately. We shouldn't give room for impunity at all, in any way. We need to ensure that we develop minimum standards for ethical procurement, right? So part of the issues come from when you don't have a clearly defined standard, in terms of your procurement, onboarding processes of your staff, right? Because it starts from there. We're talking about leadership, we're talking about walking the talk, right? How do you imbibe the right quality and the right attitude in people, right? Almost everyone has business ethics and code of ethics, right? Where I work, we have behavioral codes. You understand that everyone is held accountable to. Not only the younger ones, everyone in the organization is held accountable to it. And most importantly, we make sure we collect citizens' complaints and strengthen the whistleblower protection. Is extremely important. People will not come up, they won't speak up if they know that there is no protection. So we need to ensure that we strengthen the whistleblower protection very much. And of course, we need to enable the media to hold the government accountable. A lot of times we have a media that is afraid to speak up. I mean, the media is the voice of conscience of the people, right? If these are put in place, I believe that this will help us a lot. We also need to speak against wrongdoing. When we have various engagement sessions, do we allow everybody to come into the room and speak freely? We need to start having that culture of enabling and allowing to hear the voice of everyone and make sure that there's appropriate reaction to that. And like I said, we need to digitize the process. Processes that you digitize makes it very difficult for you to be able to compromise. A lot of people think digitization will bring about lost jobs. No, there are other competencies and capabilities that digitization has brought about that were not there some years back. Now, going back to the specific question of do we do the extreme of China? I believe that when we do the basic, right? And the basic is ensuring that we have the right guiding principles in place. The basic will guide us to that. If the basic now doesn't work, we might now start thinking about the extreme. That would be my.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, okay. Does anybody else have any opinion, or Lola, can we go to the next one?
We have another question.
Okay.
And the question reads, where do you draw I think this is from Facebook. Where do you draw the line between bribing and the token of appreciation? For instance, when a member of the public tips a public servant for a service, is that supposed to be free? I think this is talking about what is a bribe and what is
a gift. A tip. Yeah. Okay. I think a number of people have spoke to it, so I'll just leave it open for the panelists. Does anybody want to just quickly talk about that? Where do we draw the line between a token and what could then be seen as a bribe. Anybody?
Can I make a remark?
Yes, sir.
Samago.
Yes, you can.
Yes, thank you very much. And I like giving clear-cut illustrations. I was reading a book, a compilation of former heads of service in Western region. We served our generation, people like Pa Udumosu, Chief Simeon Adebo, and there was an illustration of staff in Western Nigeria, I'm talking about 60s, who bought, I think, a Citroen, and the amount of money which you buy, which you're given as car loan, is simply to buy the Morris Minor. And so he was given a query to come and explain, where did you get money to buy a Citroen? They pursued it to a logical end. So I think it sounds a little bit banal, but I think we need to apply those rules at this particular period. When people emerge the money or wealth, we need to ask questions. Of course, I do agree with what my dear sister, Mrs. Bakare, said in terms of how do we do it, in terms of taking it from bit, in terms of questions, in terms of advocacy issues and all those things. We need to ask questions. We need to go back. Where did you, all those things? Because these days, I'm sorry to say, people will say, well, this is the work of God. I think we need to move beyond all those things and implement a whole range of issues, a whole range of rules and regulations, and let our institutions also function. But I think we should, like I said, walk the talk at the end of the day. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Well, at this point, I think that we're almost ready for a wrap-up. I'm told that we wrap up at 2:50. So what I will do now is just to see if if anybody wants to just make some closing remarks. Otherwise, I will make some closing comments. I think most importantly, we all appear to be on the same wavelength as far as this effort to moderate corruption is concerned. There are some common themes that have run through all the discussions that we've had and all the contributions from the panelists. We've talked about tone at the top. We've talked about building an ethical culture. We've talked about, building a compliance program that is specific and not general, because that way it is easier for the entities to imbibe and to comply. We've talked about sanctions. We've talked about people doing things, the right way. And I think that most important of all, there are very different ways that corruption manifests. And I think that we've mentioned a number of them. And it's really, business ethics is a very, very important element as far as fighting corruption is concerned. And I think that the institutions such as banks and the Nigerian Association of Chambers of Commerce, the World Bank, US Africa Business Center, we all have a role, to play along with the individuals who work in things like compliance. I mean, people like Anthony Wairi, who is a subject matter specialist and an anti-fraud examiner, we all have a role to play. And the better that we all put our efforts together, in order to tame this monster called corruption, because that is the only way that Nigeria and Africa can actually move ahead. I think that's basically where we will have to end this panel for now, except if anyone has any comments they would like to add before we are taken to the main session. We will be taken at any time now. So yes, please.
Yes, I just wanted to add to it. At the core of it is strict governance, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
we're saying that a lot of small companies, they can't afford, to the cost of putting all these processes in place, right? But these
Yes.
small companies as well need enhancement to be able to grow their business. And there are some specific standards in terms of requirements of governance between these companies. So the earlier these companies start doing the right thing, the better, right? I will take my bank, for instance. We have clearly defined code of conduct, behavioral codes, right? And it is behaviors that are acceptable and measured for everyone. So not only do we have this, we must constantly communicate this to all that we engage with within our organization. Communication is extremely important. And as we communicate, the behaviors acceptable, we communicate the remuneration for doing right, we communicate the sanctions for doing wrong. And especially in December, I want to tell everybody who's listening to us, this is December period. Know what gift you should accept. Every organization should have a gift policy, which clearly defines what is acceptable as gift or not. And anything beyond that acceptable level should be declared and given to humanity and given to build the economy. That is where we draw the line to start effecting this change. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Let me just mention something which I'm not sure if it's been mentioned, but the Center for International Private Enterprise is at the moment building a portal. The concept basically is ethics first. And it's a portal that will help companies in Nigeria to identify themselves at certain levels of ethical compliance. And the most important thing about this portal is that portal is going to be available to multinational companies all over the world, and particularly in the US as well. And when you get on ethics first, you progress through a number of levels. And at the highest levels, it provides the company with the benefit of being made a partner by some of the multinational companies that exist. I think that what I will ask Lola to do perhaps at the general session is perhaps to mention it if it's allowed. I don't think that when Andrew Wilson was making his comments at the beginning, I don't know whether he mentioned, I don't think I recall that, but I think it's a very important thing that should help this whole business of improving ethical operations and fighting corruption. So that's just my comment on that. Okay, great. So any final comments from anyone? Okay, I think there's a link that has been shared in the chat box for Ethics First. So I think that anyone who wants to know a little bit more about it should please go ahead and look at it. But if for any reason you don't get it, I believe that Lola can help, and I can certainly help in the absence of that, because I think it's a very, very good innovation and a very good development. So here we are. I think we're already counting down to the wrap up. Let me just thank the panelists, Anthony, Ambassador Ayo Lukoni, Lisa, Muji, Lola, of course, you seem to be our associate panelist in this group. So thank you very much for jumping in. And I think that we've had a very, very lively discussion and very good questions, which have raised quite a number of issues. And I hope that we can progress some of them. I think that there will be some communique at the end of this conference. And I'm sure that someone will put together some of the actionable points, because I think for me, that's what I think must happen at the end of every conference. Somebody must be in charge of actioning some of these things. Otherwise, we'll just end up talking and we wait until the next conference. I hope that this will not be the case in this one. So thank you very much, everyone. It's been my pleasure. I really enjoyed speaking with all of you, and I do hope that we can maintain the dialogue together on different aspects. I will certainly be coming to some of you individually on some of the things that have come up, because at SIPE, that's the Center for International Private Enterprise, and IOD CCG, we're trying to do quite a lot of work on anti-corruption. So hopefully we will be getting in touch with all of you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Please just stay where you are. the breakout session would end, or you might see a window that says leave breakout room. If you leave the room now, you just go.
We also had to look at that with the various sessions that took place simultaneously. So understanding this context is very significant in making a recommendation rather on the way forward. A great deal of the solution and strategy on the way forward can be distilled from the various presentations that we've had today. And some of these factors are actually issues that require collective actions and collaboration by all stakeholders. We're talking about the private as well as the public sectors. Doing business with transparency, you will agree with me, and integrity should become a matter of culture. And as rightly stated, that is not just about having a system, we should also concentrate on the practice. So private business owners and managers are thereby encouraged to enlist in some existing platforms such as the Clean Business Process Initiative, the CBI, and also the United Nations Global Compact, UNGC, and more importantly, to be part of our Ethics First initiative so that we can have a way of turning what we have in the system into culture and practice. Government policies and processes must be proactive and responsive to effectively prevent and fight corruption. This is imperative to tackling corruption in Nigeria and in Africa as a whole, and to enable us to realize the dividends of good governance, job creation, and wealth. Other components have to be situated within institutional context, which may require reforms of key institutions of the state. Therefore, in coming up with our recommendation on the way forward, we have to take all these dimensions into account. The strategy has to be collective and inclusive. No one segment of the society can fight corruption alone. On this note, I want to thank all our speakers and participants as I urge you all to collaborate across whatever boundaries currently exist to ensure that we get the right outcomes from this program. We need to do this very urgently in order to be able to tame the monster of corruption before it does more damage than it has already done to our society, to our country, and to Africa at large. Thank you very much, and we'll see you again tomorrow.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ojo, for that wonderful call to action, which he took in replacement of Dr. Kale, who had to dash up to some other urgent engagement. Well, the information is very clear, and there's no doubt that if we act on this information, we will definitely be championing a cause that would help the issue of corruption. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we are at that point of concluding day one of our conference, and I want to let you know that all participants can send in their questions for the DG of LCCI and the country director of CEP, who would be having a plenary and Q&A session tomorrow morning. So you can send in all your questions. They will do well to answer those questions when they have their session tomorrow. And also, as I did mention sometime earlier today, the winners of the challenge, the pitch challenge, will be announced on day 3 of this event. So please, you have to stay tuned to that, as the winners will be announced on day 3. Do we have, okay? So we want to say a big thank you to all the wonderful speakers. So we want to say a very special thank you to all the wonderful speakers that grace today's event, from the keynote from the welcome address from our chief host, Mrs. Toki Abogunje, and the delivery from Mr. Andrew Wilson, the executive director of SIPE. We want to say a very special thank you to them. And we also want to say a special thank you to His Excellency Professor Benedict Orama, the president of Afrexim Bank, who was ably represented by Mr. Idrissa Diop, the director of compliance of Afrexim Bank, who gave us also a very passionate delivery. We are not forgetting Mr. Patrick Obat, the chairman of board Standard Chartered Bank Kenya, who also gave a very, very passionate delivery. And as we said, he is a champion on ethic practice in our general place of work and environment. So we'd say a very special thank you to all those wonderful individuals that spoke today. So let's make it a date tomorrow, early enough to be part of day 2 of our conference. And as I did mention, the plenary Q&A session that will be handled by the DG of LCCI and the country director of SIPE will be happening tomorrow. So all your questions can be sent in and they will do their best to answer all those questions. So ladies and gentlemen, at this point in time, we'll be drawing the curtain for the day 1 of the ABEC 2020, the hybrid edition. And from all of us here, reaching you live from the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industries headquarters in Lagos, Nigeria, we say a very big farewell to you and hope to see you tomorrow as we embark on the day 2 of this wonderful event. For now, do have a wonderful day and see you tomorrow.
SMEs are the driving force of African economies, accounting for 40% of continental GDP and 50% of employment. But despite being the backbone of the economy, these businesses face significant market constraints that impede their full growth potential, in turn limiting overall economic development. The International Finance Corporation reports that SMEs in Africa experience an estimated financing gap of over $330 billion annually. They lack access to capital to grow and face high barriers of integration into global value chains. Currently, there are over 350 million African SMEs that are unbanked, and only 50% can access financial products and services according to the World Bank. Even when SMEs get access to financing, they endure higher lending rates to make up for the increased onboarding and due diligence costs bound in car due to lack of accessible and verifiable information about their operations. But what if there was a way to de-risk SMEs in Africa at scale? Enter Ethics First, an innovative new platform that is doing that by giving SMEs a route to improving their governance in a recognizable and standardized way, and increasing their visibility to global partners and financiers. It is a business-led answer to Africa's compliance needs. Aimed at enhancing the integration of African SMEs into global supply chains, Ethics First offers a low-cost digital solution for businesses to strengthen their governance and anti-corruption management systems and boost their global reputation. How does it work? African companies are invited to register on Ethics First and follow the program to demonstrate the strength of their commitment to the Ethics First values in 3 stages. Green. Business leaders sign free integrity pledge to commit to enhancing their company's governance and control systems within a specified time frame. Silver. Demonstrate enhanced anti-bribery and compliance measures, specify the size of the business, and show effective leadership commitment to corporate ethics and integrity. Gold. Complete and independent compliance and due diligence verification and review by the Ethics First Compliance Advisory Committee.